Welcome back to the Gurmukh Series, a series to highlight great figures within the Sikh Panth and those that have walked the path. And by actually learning about their lives, we can learn from their experiences and we can put them into our own lives as well. So this is the third episode of the Gurmukh Series. The first one we covered Sant Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and the second one was the life of Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. So you can check out both those podcasts if you just look in the description. And what we do at the start of every episode is that we just give a definition of a Gurmukh. So one definition here is the one who faces their Guru. The word that we use in Gurmukh is Sanmukh, who is always facing the Guru, and they live their life according to the Guru's teachings. And another cool definition is Satgur da Mukh, literally meaning the face of the Guru. So they take upon the Guru's teachings and they have literally become one with the Guru. And when you look at them, then you almost see the Guru, or you do see the Guru resonating within them. And just a Bhakti that I found in Sri Sukhmani Sahib, which is very interesting, when Guru Arjan Dev Ji says, Sabte nere, sabhute dur, which means, for those who understand Punjabi, Sabte nere, those ones who are Gurmukh are very close to Vaheguru Ji, sabhute dur, and those who turn their back on Vaheguru Ji, i.e. the one who's not a Gurmukh, who's a Manmukh, they're very far from that one. So there's a lot of definitions that we can give for the word Gurmukh. But there's one question that people always tend to ask us all the time, which is, how can you recognize a Gurmukh? So from the first episode with Sant Guru Gobind Singh Ji and then Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, we've had Bhai Jivanpal Singh Ji speak about their Jeevanis, and now I'll pass it over to them to explain to us how can we recognize a Gurmukh? Because people always have this question, right?
With the Kirpa of Guruji, we've got this opportunity to talk about the lives of those Gursikhs who spent their whole life spreading the Sikhi of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. Not only did they spread that Sikhi, they themselves lived that Sikhi. So the common question that we get, and it's just how everything works, that where you have Pura, you have Adura. If you have day, you have night. If you have Sukh, you have Dukh. The Gurbani as well makes this point where the definition of a Pura Sant is given. Maharaj, where they say, Jina saas giras na visra har nama manamant, tan se say Nanaka Puran soi Sant. They use the word Puran. So if something's Pura, there's always something Adura as well. If there's Puran Sants, there'll also be Adure Sant.
What does Adure mean?
Adura means incomplete, and Puran means complete. So Puran would be someone who's reached that avastha and they truly embody that avastha of Sant.
Anji.
Then there'll also be people who may call themselves Sant or give themselves a title, but it doesn't mean that they have the avastha or the qualities, the gun that title carries. So Bhai Gurdas Ji, who Mahapurush like Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, when you listen to their divans, they always say Guru Karte Ved Vyas. And Ved Vyas was Puratan Samay de vich, he was a great Mahapurush who the Char Ved, the 4 scriptures of the Sanatan Dharam, he put them into order, or he categorized them. So he's seen as a very great scholar. Bhai Gurdas Ji was given such a great title by Guru Sahib Ji that Bhai Gurdas Ji was the one whose Bani, reading their Bani, is the kunji to understanding the meanings of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So whenever we have these sort of questions, sometimes we forget Bhai Gurdas Ji's Bani. Bhai Gurdas Ji's Bani has answers to a lot of our questions. So this common question, how do you recognize who is a Puran Gursikh or a Sadhu, a true saint? And in the 35th Var, so the Vars of Bhai Gurdas Ji, we have the Var and we have the Kabit Savaiya. And in the Vars, the 35th Var, the 17th Pauri, Bhai Gurdas Ji answers this very question. So it's said that Gursikhs came to Bhai Gurdas Ji and they did benti. In Gurbani, Maharaj says, do sangat of the sadhus. Sad sangat karo. How do you recognize the sad from the asad? When you put era in front here, it means the opposite of sad, someone who isn't a sad, but they might be masquerading as a sadhu. So it's a very beautiful body, and we'll just go through it very quickly. And Bhai Guru Das Ji gives 5 different drishtants, 5 different examples to understand how do we recognize a sadhu from a asadhu. So Bhai Sahib Ji says, Gucha hoye trikanua kyo vudiya dakha. Bhai Sahib Ji says. So what Bhai Sahib Ji does is they give these 2 different objects in every single line. So the first example they give is of trikanua and dakha. So trikanua are what are called China berries. The dakha da gucha jada hega, that would be grapes. So in the way that they look very similar. The grapes and China berries, they look very similar. It's like when you go into the forest, they say don't just pick out any berry because they might be poisonous. No?
Yeah.
Someone who has the vidya or someone knows how to recognize the ones that are safe and the ones that are not safe. They'll know. No? In the same way, dakha, so grapes, which are very sweet, and China berries, they look very similar. But in fact, they're the total opposite. Right? The China berry is very toxic. So if you eat that, you'll get poisoned. And the other side, the dakha da jara guchaya, the bunch of grapes, they're just so sweet. Even though they look the same, they look very similar. So that's the first example that they give. So they look the same. One is poisonous, one is sweet. And then the second example Bhai Guru Das Ji gives is akke keri khakhadi koi amb na akha. And if you remember to Nanak Prakash Katha, we went through the Sakhi when Bhai Guru Das Ji is really, Bhai Mardana Ji is really hungry.
Yeah.
And the story about the Ak.
Panj.
So we won't go too much into that. But those who've read Nanak Prakash, they'll know about this Sakhi, that the Ak is something, it's called, the English name, I might pronounce it wrong, it's called Calotropis procera. It grows in India and these sort of very hot climates. They take fruit, it's like it looks like a fruit. This sort of milky sap comes out of it. And it's very bitter. And it's like very gluey. And if it gets on your hand, it's even resistant to any sort of soap.
Oh, wow.
It's quite a interesting thing. And if you Google it, you can find out about it. And all these different things, the Ayurvedic practitioners, Purane Samaya de vich, Ved, so doctors, you could say, of Ayurveda, even these things which were poisonous, they were quite useful to them.
Okay.
Because in certain amounts, these things can be good. If used with other things that balance out the properties. If it's eaten like in its raw form, you'll just get poisoned. And in that Sakhi, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji says, eat this ak. Bhai Mardana Ji says that this is like poisonous, it's so bitter, how can I eat the ak? But Maharaj Di Drishti, when the nigah, the glance of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji went on the ak, it turned sweet. So this ak, everyone in Punjab knows that the ak is something you don't want to eat. But the shape of it, the look of it looks very similar to a mango. So akke keri khakhadi koi amb na ak hai. So ak, everyone knows that the ak is poisonous, is bitter, is toxic. But it looks like a mango.
Anji.
But koi nahi kehda ke amb hega. Does anyone say ke amb hega just because it looks the same? Sare nu pata hai. Huh? So in the same way, the sadhus are sweet like the mango. They give sweetness. They are sweet themselves. So there's one example in Chanakya Rajniti. It's a granth of politics that was written by Chanakya Riki, and it was translated in Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Darbar. So I can't remember the exact Bhagti, but Chanakya gives this example of something which is sweet on the outside, but inside is bitter. And they give an example of never trusting someone who, for example, if you have like a cup of poison and the rim of that cup, you put sugar on it, that person not to be trusted. So something that looks sweet, but in fact is poison. So in the same way, the ak, it looks like a amb, but the ak is poisonous. And then you might have someone who outside, they look like a Gursikh or Sant, but inside they have bitterness. But the true sadhu, the true Gursikh or the true Mahapurush is someone who, like the amb, when you see the amb, you think sweetness. When you taste it, it is sweet. So the experience with a Gursikh, a true Gursikh, that in itself will give you a lot of your answers. So that's the second example that Bhai Gurdas Ji used of ak and amb, that no one calls a ak a mango just because it looks like a mango. And then the third example, gehne jo jarpos de nahi soye na sakha. Bhai Gurdas Ji says that there's two types of gehne. One is shuddha sona, which is pure gold. And the second is that metal, which is jarpos. Another word is mulamma, and that comes a lot in Gurbani. For example, mulamma paj leh jaye. Mulamma basically means coating something, so it looks like sona. So, like ajikal, you have like electroplating and these sort of things.
Anji.
So they get a metal, they coat it, and it looks like it's gold, but it's fake.
Yeah.
Right? And on the other hand, you have real gold, shuddha sona, which is pure gold. So, gehne jo jarpos de nahi soyan sak hai. No one gives saak. Saak da matlab hega, koi saak nahi bharda. No one guarantees that the gehne of jarpos, because people who can't afford it, they'll buy jarpos de gehne just because it looks nice, but it's not the real thing. But no one will say ki haan ye asal sona hai, because they know that when it's taken to anyone who can test sona, straight away they'll test it on a kasavatti and they'll realize कि हाँ ये fake हैगा, it's counterfeit, ये असल सोना नहीं हैगा. कोई साख नहीं पड़ता. साख का मतलब that no one gives a guarantee and no one will say हाँ ये असल सोना है. If you go to the shop of a jeweler, he'll say हाँ ये jarpos de है गया, because he knows if he tries to sell fake and he's found out, then his business is going to be finished. So gehne jo jarpos de nahi soye na sakhe, they both look the same. To the untrained eye, they both sona. But no one gives a saak that jeda jarpos da gehna, the plated sona, that's real sona. Then the fourth example Bhai Sahib Ji gives, Phatakana pujjan hireya oe pare byakha. The Bhai Sahib Ji says the fourth example is ke kach te kach da bilaur and hira. So kach da bilaur is like it's made in the shape of like a globe, or purane samay vich they would use it as like a paperweight. It's made out of kach, it's made out of glass, and sometimes they would make it in the shape of a diamond, right? So if you have a glass crystal, you know, some people have like decorative glass crystals and things like that, and then you have a real diamond. Jo Johari hai gaya, like we hear of Bhai Salis Rai Johari Ji. What was his job? His job was to like ascertain what is a real diamond and what is fake. Anyone can make a glass diamond, right? And then say, "Eh asal ya." But the Johari knows that keda asal hira ya and keda bilaur, kachada bilaur is made out of glass, right? So glass crystal, it reaches nowhere near the soba of a diamond. And the Johari straight away will know that eh asal ya, eh counterfeit ya, eh fake ya. Unnu pata ya. So phatakna pujjan hireya. Jada phatak hega ya kachda bilora made out of glass, it does not pudge, it does not go anywhere near the worth of a hira, because a hira is priceless. Taule dissan chahe dud sadahu guna gak hai. And then the fifth example is of butter, dud and lassi. So buttermilk, which is lassi, and dud. Now lassi and dud, they look very similar. So especially the normal lassi. So not some other, there's many different types of lassis. But jeda simple pind de vich dud da lassi milda ya, that looks white.
Yeah.
It just looks like dud. It's only when you drink that lassi or you drink the dud, you know that ha eh dud ya eh lassi ya. Otherwise you could just mistake ha eh dud ya ja lassi, you wouldn't know. So dud and lassi, they look the same, they're both white, but from the taste, when you experience it, then you realize ha eh khatta ya. The lassi is khatta and the dud is mittha. Through experience, through realizing that even though something might look the same, it doesn't mean that they're both on the same avastha. The same way that these two vastus of dud and lassi, they look exactly the same. When you taste it, you realize. Now, given these different examples, 5 different examples, now Bhai Gurdas Ji comes to the answer of this question. Bhai Gurdas Ji says, "Teo saad asad parkhiyan kartoot so pak hai." Saad and asad can be parkhiyan. Parkhiyan means they can be tested or they can be recognized. How? Kartoot so pak hai. Kartoot means their actions and so pak hai means from their boli. So the sadhu and someone who's not a sadhu, from their words and their actions, because sometimes they could be very sweet words, but their words don't match their actions.
Anji.
So it's like for many Mahapurushs like Sant Giani Janel Singh Ji, you'll always see this when someone writes, they say, "Kani te kathani de sure." What they said, they did. Kani means what you say, kathani is your actions. So I can say many great words, doesn't mean I act on them. But Gursikh or Mahapurush is that entity who doesn't only do say grand things or say many, they don't preach to people many different upadesh, they also follow the upadesh.
Anji.
So the saint and the asad, so the person who isn't a saint, they can be recognized from their actions and their boli. When a sadhu speaks, Bani uchara hai sad jan, amme uchala hai charne. In Gurbani says when the Mahapurush speak or the Mahapurush speak about Gurbani, then Amrit de charne, the fountains of Amrit, they come from them. And sitting in the presence of a true Gursikh, because they've actually experienced what they're talking about, it has a different effect. Now, everything we're going to talk about today, all the spiritual experiences of Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, we get a lot of inspiration from them, but we haven't experienced them. When someone who's actually experienced something speaks, it's a different effect on the listeners.
Anji.
So the saint will say those words which would join people to Maharaj. Just their words or their darshan, because their jivan is such, has such a great effect. And we discussed this in Sant Baba Attar Singh, the podcast, about how the bachan of the Gursikhs are pare hoye, like a loaded gun, or like a kaman, like a bow, which has an arrow in it. And the bachan of those people who don't kama, they don't practice what they preach, it's just like an empty gun.
Anji.
It doesn't
No effect.
No effect. So the sadhu, when he speaks, he joins people. The speech of sadhu is sweet. The speech of the sadhu reflects their jivan. And then the other side, someone could be masquerading as a sant or say that I'm a sant, but their words cause fights. Their words cause division in the Panth. So the pura sadhu will destroy all fights. He won't create fights. So Bhai Gurdas Ji here gives a very sundar example that with this, the kartoot and the supakha, their shreshth boli and their actions, that's how you recognize a sadhu.
Anji.
And Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji was someone that their jivan had such an effect because both of these pak, not only were their bachan such, their actions or the way they lived their jivan was reflecting the bachans that they used to say.
Anji. So you've pretty much already introduced the third episode then, i.e. we'll be talking about Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji today. Just to reiterate the 2 points of the boli, as in the words, and also the actions, which we'll probably go through today anyway, within the Jivani of Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. And just something that came to my mind when you're speaking about those two things was a Bhagti from Sukhmani Sahib as well, where Guru Arjan Dev Ji says, "Jiske antar base nirankar, tiski sikh tere sansar." The one that has God's name inside their heart, very simply, tiski sikh, that their teachings tere sansar, the way that they live their life, the teachings that they've applied into their lives, by applying them into our lives, then tere sansar, then we can be carried across this worldly ocean as well, and the people of this world can be carried across. So, we talked about Sant Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, and now today Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. So for somebody who's never heard of this Gurmukh, this Mahapurush before, who was Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji?
संतन की महिमा कवन वखानो, अगाध बोध किछ mit nahi jano. So the mema of Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, it cannot be said. But I can't tell you who Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji is. But what we will do is give you a little bit of a sneak peek into the next podcast, which is going to be on Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji. And Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji, by coincidence, I was just reading a book about them. And they've written about Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. So just to give you a very brief introduction to Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji, they were a Mahapurush who lived for 123 years. And out of them 123 years of their life, for 70 years, without any break, they did Kirtan every single day at Darbar Sahib. And to this day, those Gursikhs who've been fortunate to do Seva, Amrit Vale di Seva, Ishnan di Seva at Darbar Sahib, the first deg that comes, so this is before the Prakash of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, when they do Ishnan of Darbar Sahib, the deg or the Kada Prashadi deg, that's always prepared in the boundary of Darbar Sahib by Sevadars of Darbar Sahib. But the first deg always comes from Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji's dera to this day. So the Sevadars at Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji's Asthan, which is not far from Darbar Sahib, it's in Atta Mandi. Every single day they prepare the deg and they bring it.
Wow.
So Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji was a Mahapurush who every other Mahapurush of their time and after them, they considered Baba Sham Singh Ji a Brahm Giani. So in the writings of Sant Giani Gurbachan Singh Ji, Bhai Pai Rantir Singh Ji, loads of different Gursikhs, they had a lot of respect for Baba Sham Singh Ji. Bhai Veer Singh Ji, they actually took Amrit from Baba Sham Singh Ji. So Baba Sham Singh Ji is someone who hopefully our next podcast will be about them. And they've written a Granth, handwritten Granth. It's called Sri Bhagat Prem Prakash. And that Granth has never been published. Sections of that Granth have been copied into their Jivani, called Sant Gatha. But Baba Sham Singh Ji, during their lifetime, they didn't want this Granth published, just because they had so much Nimrata. They were very gupt, and they didn't really want any sort of limelight. But that Granth is amazing, and it's got so many Sakhis and so much Gyan. But at the same time, Baba Sham Singh Ji writes about Mahapurush that they know of. And Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji writes a small paragraph on Baba Attar Singh Ji. And it basically just summarizes who Baba Attar Singh Ji was. So, Mahapurush Baba Sham Singh Ji write, Sri Bhai Attar Singh Ji Sant, Ath Pahar hi Har Simran, Har Kirtan, Ar Gurmat Prachar da Jinka Bivhar hai, Mastuane mein Nivas karte hai. So it's in this old language, old sort of boli of Punjabi. And Baba Sham Singh Ji says that Sri Bhai Attar Singh Ji Sant, so Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, they are that entity, that Mahapurush who Ath Pahar Salahe Sirjanhar tu. Ath Pahar means 24 hours a day. They are immersed in Har Simran, the Simran of Vaheguru, Har Kirtan, the Kirtan of Vaheguru. And their Bivhar, their sustenance is doing Gurmat Prachar. Their way of living is Harida Simran, Harida Kirtan, and joining people to Maharaj. And they do Nivas in Mastuana. The place that they stay is Mastuana. Inke mukhar bind se uchare shabad premiya ke man ko anand ar ras dekar unke prem ko duna kar dete hai. So Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji says that any word that comes from Baba Attar Singh Ji's mukh, from their mouth, the premis who listen to Baba Attar Singh Ji singing shabads, and we'll go through this maybe in the next podcast. Baba Attar Singh Ji was known for doing beautiful kirtan and doing prachar, doing tarna, especially in areas where people didn't understand Gurbani. They would go and sing very simple tarna so people can join to Gurbani.
What does a tarna mean?
The tarna, we've been through it before. Tarna basically means singing the arth of Gurbani.
Anji.
So if you have a Bhakti of Gurbani, translating that into an arth and then singing the arth. Or it could be just singing Gurbani in a way which is very simple to replicate.
Anji.
So the Sangat can reply very easily to that tune.
Anji.
So whatever word comes from Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji's mukh, premiya ke man ko anand aur ras dekar, they give anand, bliss and ras to the premis, and unke prem ko duna kar dete hai. The prem that they have for Maharaj, whenever they hear Baba Attar Singh Ji speak, their prem doubles every single time. That's the power of Baba Attar Singh Ji's speech. Whatever they say, whoever listens to their speech, their prem increases. Jante santon mein jat sat ar sanjam ka bal bhi hoya ar prem bhi sacha hoya. Baba Sham Singh Ji says that in Baba Attar Singh Ji, not only do they have jat sat, so in their character, they're very high. Their morals, they're very high. They always speak the truth. And they have sanjam. They live in santokh. And they also have true love for Guru Nanak Dev Ji. ये संत ऐसे उपकारी है जो हजारों ही लोगों ਨੂੰ ਉਪਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਧਰਮ का ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਛਕਾ ਕੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਜਾ ਕੇ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਪੜਨ ਸੁਣਨ ਔਰ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਨ में ਲਗਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੈ. Baba Ji says that Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji so upakari, they're par upakari, they live their life not for themselves but to serve others. And what have they done? Hazaron hi loga, thousands and countless, they've given them upadesh of Sikhi, and they've given them the gift, or they've joined them to Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj's lad. How? By shakaing them Amrit. And later on, we'll talk about the Amrit Sanchar as Baba Attar Singh Ji did, the layer of Amrit Sanchar that Baba Attar Singh Ji started. And also we'll talk about the time that Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji was born in. Because we talked about this last time, that whenever a time comes where the Panth is in such a situation where people are not joining to Sikhi, they're not taking Amrit, or a lot of people are leaving Sikhi, people are attacking Sikhi. At that time, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj sends these Mahapurush.
Anji.
And Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji's name is also written in Sausakhi. So the Sausakhi is a Granth which contains many bachans that Gursikhs heard Gursikhs heard Sri Guru Gobind Singh Ji say.
Anji.
And in them, one of the bachans, Guru Gobind Singh Ji talks about Gurmukhs who will come to serve the Panth. And Baba Attar Singh Ji's name comes in that as well. So it says that Attar Singh, Sura, Ram Singh, Pura, like that. I might get it wrong.
Anji.
But just to say that that name is mentioned there. So a lot of Gursikhs will say that's Baba Attar Singh Ji's name. So I don't want to enter into that debate because some people say, oh, that's not referring to them. But
Anji.
From the very actions or the effect that Baba Attar Singh Ji had on the Panth, we can say that it's very possible. That is talking about Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. So the lair, or like a literal wave of Amrit Sanchars that Baba Attar Singh Ji did when they started Prachar, it's countless Puraniya who took Amrit and started doing Simran, started reading Gurbani. They joined to the house of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji says that giving the Upadesh, they've bakshed that daat of Amrit, joining in the Panj Piare. And then they didn't join people to themselves. What did they do? Gurbani paran sunan kirtan karne mein laga dita. They joined them to Gurbani. Reading Gurbani, listening and doing kirtan. सैकड़े आदमी जो रहत मर्यादा विच कच्चे से तिनमो संता की कृपा से गुरसिक्खी की रहत अनुसार वर्तने का बल हो गया है. So those who were not Amritari, उन्होंने अमृत छकाया. And those who were very tille in their रहत, if they met Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji once, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਰਹਿਤ ਪ੍ਰਪੱਕ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ, ਤਿਆਰ ਬਰ ਤਿਆਰ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ. So this is the last ਪੰਕਤੀ that Baba Sham Singh Ji writes. ऐसे संत ਧਨ ਹਨ. Such sants as Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, they are done. They are blessed. And just to talk about the time that Baba Attar Singh Ji came into, it's really interesting that Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji takes birth in 1866. That is 27 years after Maharaja Ranjit Singh passes away. So Maharaja Ranjit Singh passes away in 1839.
Anji.
If you think about it, 27 years is not a long time. Because we sort of put the gap, in my mind anyway, before I read this, I thought that Baba Attar Singh Ji was a lot after that time. But only 27 years after Maharaja Ranjit Singh passes away. And as we know, after Maharaja Ranjit Singh passes away, there's many wars. And during that time, Holi, that Raj or Panjab, which was the last place to be annexed. The British took over all of India, but they couldn't get Punjab. After Maharaja Ranjit Singh, due to the infighting in the Sikhs or a lot of Gadars who came.
Yeah.
And there were many Gursikhs, for example, Bhai Maharaj Singh Ji. who fought against the British. Baba Attar Singh Ji in Aurangabad. Many people rebelled. But then ultimately, after the Anglo-Sikh wars, the British annexed Punjab. They take Maharaja Dalip Singh away. And in 1849, they annexed Punjab. And Baba Attar Singh Ji is born 17 years after Punjab is annexed. So it's a very short period of time. And during that time, as this political attacks on Sikhi in terms of taking our Raj away, at the same time, dharmic attacks on Sikhi start to happen.
Anji.
So what happens in that time, the British come in and not only do the British come in and take over the government of Punjab, we start to see loads of missionaries in Punjab. So these missionaries I'm talking about, for example, Christian missionaries, you had Brahmo Samaj, you had Gulab Dasiya, all these different groups who in everyone's dharm is Satkar Jog. We're not saying here that their dharm is wrong or anything like that. That's their dharm, that's Satkar Jog, that we respect everyone's dharm. But at that time, there's no denying that there was a movement to convert Sikhs.
Anji.
So ਜਿਹੜੇ Sikh ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਟਾਰਗੇਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ the Christian missionaries at that time, they did start to target Sikhi in a way. And even the first typeface of Gurmukhi was done by the Christian missionaries, right? So the typing, the printing presses, when they were brought in, one of the first reasons that the Christian missionaries wanted to change or bring a Gurmukhi typeface so they could write material in Gurmukhi and use it as material to convert Sikh to Christianity. So at that time, there's a lot of attacks on Sikhi. And that's the time where Baba Attar Singh Ji comes. In that sort of time period where politically and dharmically, religiously, Sikhi is being attacked on all four sides. And we hear about that time where you go to villages, you'd go to towns, and there's no nishani of Rat, people taking Amrit. It's very rare. And at that time, Baba Attar Singh Ji takes birth, and their prachar was such that they reignited the love for Guru Nanak Dev Ji in thousands and countless. So, Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji used to do a bachan that if the Panth wants to be in Chardi Kala, because Baba Attar Singh Ji came and they gave us that formula, because we all have this question now, that how can the Panth be in Chardi Kala? That even now we have these sort of issues in the Panth. We have a lot of things where we've been attacked. Sikhis being attacked in terms of our Gurasthans have been attacked. So many Guru Sikhs have been made shaheed in the 80s and so on. Even to this day, Sikhs are being made shaheed or arrested. And then on the other hand, where we're being attacked physically, we're also being attacked ideologically, where people are attacking Gurbani. They're attacking Rat, they're attacking Sikhi. And in the past few years, we've seen how much that's increased. Now, that question everyone has, that how does the Panth be in Chardi Kala? Baba Attar Singh Ji came to answer that question, and they gave us the formula. What did they say? Baba Attar Singh Ji used to say कि भाई अमृत वेले 3 ਵਜੇ जद ਖੂਹੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਡੋਲ ਖਰਕਣਗੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਹਰ ਰਸਨਾ ਧੰਨ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਦਾ ਜਾਪ ਅਲਾਪੇਗੀ ਤਦੋਂ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ ਹੋਵੇਗਾ ਅਤੇ ਪੰਥ ਦਾ ਤਪ ਤੇਜ ਵਧੇਗਾ. The tap tej, the tej of the Panth, the power of the Panth, ਉਹ ਕਦੋਂ ਵਧੂਗਾ? When ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਵੇਲੇ 3 ਵਜੇ ਖੂਹੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਡੋਲ ਖੜਕਣਗੇ. What that means is ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਸਮੇਂ 'ਚ ਪਿੰਡਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਵੇਲੇ ਉੱਠਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਕਰਨਾ, they didn't used to have showers. They had to go to the khoo, and ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡੋਲ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ, the bucket, that would be thrown into the water. And when that happens, it makes a splash, it makes a sound, and it wakes everyone up. When Amrit Vele, you know people are getting up at Amrit Vela, ਜਦੋਂ ਖੂਹੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਡੋਲ ਖੜਕਣਗੇ 3 ਵਜੇ, meaning ਘੱਟ ਤੋਂ ਘੱਟ 3 ਵਜੇ ਜਾਂ 4 ਵਜੇ 2 ਵਜੇ, whatever your time is for Amrit Vela, in that time you get up at Amrit Vela and sing, ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਨਿਤਨੇਮ ਕਰਨਗੇ, and every single rasana of a Gursikh is saying Tan Guru Nanak, is saying Satnam Vaheguru. They're doing Simran, Amrit Vela, they're doing their nitnem, they're living the Rat of a Khalsa. So when we live that Rat, then we can do the Prachar of it. If we're not living the Rat, If the Pracharaks themselves aren't living that right, then how's the tapatej of Sikhi going to vad?
Hanji.
Baba Attar Singh Ji not only said these bachans, they lived these bachans. So coming back to that point, that this is exactly what Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji did in their life.
Right.
They lived this practical life and they practiced what they preach. And because they never sold out or they never, whatever bachan they did, they followed it. They had an effect on everyone from the Aam Varg. So that means the normal population of Punjab, all the way to even like the Raja of Punjab at that time, they respected Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. So the Mahapurush of our Panth, Sant Giani Guru Bachan Singh Ji, Baba Sham Singh Ji we talked about, Sant Baba Nand Singh Ji at the end of the podcast will share what Baba Nand Singh Ji said about Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, Sant Baba Maggar Singh Ji, Bhai Veer Singh Ji, Bhai Khan Singh Ji, Sant Baba Teja Singh Ji. We can go through all the Mahapurush and what they had to say about Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. That could be just a podcast on itself. So that was Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. Their legacy is that not only did they ignite the love for Sikhi in Punjab, even in the West, we'll go through that later. How did Baba Attar Singh Ji cause the love for Sikhi to, or the prachar of Sikhi to be done in the West?
Well, thank you for just sharing that with us when it comes to who was Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. And just one of the points that you made about the state at that time being so bad after the fall of the kingdom and the annexing of Punjab and stuff. One Bhakti that comes to mind is from Guru Gobind Singh Ji when they say, Jab jab hot arist apara, tab tab dehe tarat avatara. That when there are such obstacles in the world for the saints, for those who walk in the spiritual path, then tab tab, then Vaheguru Ji themselves takes upon the form, or they send their saints, they send their Guru Sikhs on this earth to resolve those issues. So that just seems very fitting for when you talk about Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. And that pretty much links to the next question I have, Ji, which is about when they came upon this earth, when they took birth and their childhood, and maybe also like the influences, the people that are around them, that influenced them from such a young age as well.
Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji took birth in 1866. The pind is Chima Pind. It's in Patiala. Their Pitaji's name is Baba Karam Singh Ji and their Mataji was Mata Poli Ji. Baba Attar Singh Ji also had a sister who gave them a lot of prem and they had a lot of affection for their sister, elder sister, Mata Ratan Kaur Ji. So, in terms of Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji's childhood, from their very childhood, they were immersed in Simran. And these are like the nishani of those Mahapurush who have been sent by Guru Sahib Ji. Sant Baba Teja Singh Ji. So a lot of this podcast we're going to do is based on the book written by Sant Baba Teja Singh Ji. And Sant Baba Teja Singh Ji is an amazing character, and their life is just amazing because we can relate a lot to their life because they actually studied in the West. They were sent to study in the West by Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. We'll go through a little bit more about them later. Sant Baba Teja Singh Ji has written the biography of Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. And in that biography, they've actually gone to all the people who did Sangat with Baba Attar Singh Ji and wrote down their experiences. And they even went to Baba Attar Singh Ji's Mataji at the time that she was alive. And they asked Baba Attar Singh Ji's Mataji, so Mata Poli Ji, about Baba Attar Singh Ji's childhood. And Mataji says that to Sant Teja Singh Ji that as a child, leera hundiyan ya. Leera are like different pieces of cloth that we have lying around in a house. Baba Attar Singh Ji will collect all the leera and make a mala of them. They join and make knots and make a mala. And then they will sit there in this age of like 2 or 3 years old. And they would just start doing Simran with the mala. And then they wouldn't only make the mala for themselves out of all these different pieces of cloth. They'd even make it for their friends. And then they'd make their friends sit down and do Simran. So that was the effect in their childhood that they were having. So forget 50, 60 years later, in the early age of 2 or 3 years old, they're making their friends do Simran. So aap japa hai, avrah naam japave. In 1926, Baba Teja Singh Ji, who wrote this biography, they actually told Baba Attar Singh Ji that your Mataji said this. Is it true? And Baba Attar Singh Ji said, हाँ भाई तेजा सिंह, नेकी उम्र तो सानू ये शौक सीगा कि लीरा दी माला बना के बैठ के राम नाम दी माला फेरिए. Just from my very early age is my shauq, that to get a mala, to make this mala, because then he used to have They couldn't go to any old shop and buy a mala or something. Baba used to make this mala out of the leader, out of the random piece of cloth. And that's how much shankh they had inside them to do Simran. And not only do that Simran themselves, but also get their friends to do Simran. And eventually, as Baba Attar Singh Ji gets a bit older, their parents start to think about education. Us ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, as I said, the British Raj had started, and a lot of people wanted their children to be taught English or be taught state education, because that was how they saw that they would get government jobs and so on. And even at that time, ज़्यादातर ਤਾਂ Urdu ਤੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਭਾਸ਼ਾ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਏ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. But Baba Attar Singh Ji refused straight away. So in that shorty umar of 5-6 years old, Baba Attar Singh Ji said to their Mata Ji and their Pita Ji, ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੋਰ ਕੋਈ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਨੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਸੱਚ ਦੀ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਈ ਪੜ੍ਹਨੀ ਆ. That ਪੜ੍ਹਾਈ, that vidya of truth, of Brahm, of Vaheguru, Brahm vidya, we want to read that. We want to learn Gurmukhi. We want to learn Gurbani. So don't send me to any school or anything like that. So they didn't study any English education or any worldly sort of education. They said to their parents, I'm only going to take Gurmat vidya.
Anji.
And also, we discussed this in the first podcast, that every single pind had asthans, dere, nirmale Mahapurush, udasi Mahapurush. A lot of people have a lot to say nowadays about these Mahapurush, right? Or their sort of biases on these Mahapurush or their sampardas. But it can't be their contribution in terms of the education that they gave to the normal people of Punjab in the pinds and the villages. Zyadatar, mostly it was the Nirmale Mahapurush and the Udasis who taught Gurmukhi to people. And they taught Santhia. In certain places, Amrit Sahib, Damdama Sahib, had taksals where people would go for further education and Santhia. But in the Aam Pind, in the normal village, it was these Mahapurush who lived in these pinds and they had their own asthans who would teach Gurmukhi. So Baba Attar Singh Ji goes to Dera of Bhai Ram Singh Ji Nirmala in their pind. And at the time was Bhai Bhutta Singh Ji. Bhai Bhutta Singh Ji used to teach Gurmukhi, they used to teach Santhia, and they started learning Gurmukhi Akkar.
So do you have any other stories of Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji in their childhood?
So a funny story, when Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji was about 8 years old, and showing the prem that they had with Gursikhs or Sadhus or Sants. And at that time, there's been a lot of Sadhu Sants who would just wander from village to village with no desire for any money or anything like that. And they would just go village to village, inspiring people to do Simran. And once this Sadhu turns up at Jima Pind, and Baba Attar Singh Ji, whenever they see some Sadhu who was immersed in Simran, they would always want to spend time with them. And we hear this even in like Maharaj's Jivan, that there are a lot of prem with the Sadhu Sants when they were very young. And other Gursikhs Jivans, you start seeing that. In Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Jivan, you see that.
Anji.
Any Sadhu used to come, Maharaj used to go meet them. And then in the Gursikhs Jivan, we see that. Because the Gursikhs model their life on Maharaj's Jivan. Baba Attar Singh Ji, 8 years old, they see this Gursikh, this Sadhu, this Mahapurush. No one knows who they are. They just come and they sit under some tree and they start doing Simran. Baba Attar Singh Ji saw them and they got so inspired by their look or this glow they must have had on their face. They just walked off with them. And for 5 days, the parents didn't know. So Mataji and Mataji, Pitaji didn't know where Baba Attar Singh Ji was. 5 days, they thought he's left. In fact, Baba Attar Singh Ji had gone into the forest and they were doing Simran with this Mahapurush for 5 days. Koi pujan, nothing, just sitting there and doing Simran. That's when they're 8 years old and their parents got really worried. Another story which is about a bachan, like we heard about the Pavikhat bachan, like Mahapurush know about the future, Gursikhs know, and sometimes they might say these sort of bachans. We heard about Sant Giani Guru Bachan Singh Ji, how Maharaj did bachan about a Poor and Khalsa who will come in the pind of Akhada.
Anji.
And then this bachan also happens in Baba Attar Singh Ji's life, that Baba Attar Singh Ji ki karde sige ke Pitaji di madad karde sige. They used to do their education in terms of taking Gurmukhi, Santhia, learning Gurbani. But Nal they would help their Pitaji. They would take the cattle into the fields. They ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਰਨਾ meaning ਕਿ
Graze the fields.
Graze the fields.
Yeah.
ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡੰਗਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੈਟਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ so they let them free in the field. ਤੇ ਆਪ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਦਰਖਤ ਸੀ ਦਰਖਤ ਦੇ ਥੱਲੇ ਉਹ ਲੰਮੇ ਪੈ ਗਏ. They started to rest. ਇੱਕ ਸਾਧੂ ਸੀਗਾ who was passing by, who had kamai, and he could see certain things. And when he walked past, to the naked eye, you couldn't see this. It's like the sadhus have this way, like in Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj's Jivan, we hear about Pandit Hardayal Ji, who saw the sort of signs on Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj's charan, and they started to say many things that Maharaj will be like this, that from that very sign they realized that Guru Nanak Dev Ji was the form of a Akal Purkh. And they say that to Baba Mehta Galu Ji, and they don't believe them. So in the same way, this sadhu, they're walking past Baba Attar Singh Ji, who is lying down. Because they're lying down, they can see the sole of their foot. And when they see Baba Attar Singh Ji's charan, their foot, they see a rekha, a padam rekha, like a lotus sort of rekha. Rekha, we could say, like the lines on our feet or on our hands. They seeing that, they immediately started doing namaskar to Baba Attar Singh Ji. And what they said at that time, because there was another friend of Baba Attar Singh Ji who was with them, also helping Baba Ji, and they said कि ये एक बड़ा भारी महापुरुष होगा. This young child will be a very great Mahapurush. And even Raje Maharaje, the kings of this world, they will bow in front of Baba Attar Singh Ji. Because we all know that the sansar bows to those who are kings and queens. But those kings and queens will bow to Baba Attar Singh Ji.
Panji.
Baba Attar Singh Ji, they had that quality of daya. And the avastha that these Mahapurush get, they can't bear to see anyone in pain. Human beings in pain is one thing, but even animals. And when Baba Attar Singh Ji used to take the cattle into the field to plow the fields, aam karke what we see is that you have a stick and you all hit the animal with the stick so they go faster or they move forward.
Panji.
Baba Attar Singh has so much daya, because we hear this in the Granths, in Gurbani, that the sadhus, their main characteristic is daya. And taram comes from daya. The Taur taram daya ka poot. Or in Sar Kutabali, we hear about the 10 characteristics of a tarmi person. And the first one is Kima, Ahimsa, daya, Mrid. Daya, that compassion, is very vital. It's like a focal point of the Mahapurush. They're always in that compassionate nature. So Baba Attar Singh Ji, instead of a stick, they used to get a cloth and they used to prompt them with the cloth. Instead of using they couldn't bear to even hit the animal. That's how much daya they had in them. So that was their relationship. That was their drishti. They saw everyone as the roop of Vaheguru. They saw Vaheguru in everyone. And their itcha was always to sit in ekant. They used to help their father. They used to do plowing the fields or taking the cattle out. At the same time, they would also spend many, many hours just on their own doing Simran. And their father used to get really annoyed sometimes. Kar de kam bhi karne ya. Or naturally, a parent has that fikr for their child, that how's my child going to get married? Or how are they going to earn money? That's a very small snapshot of Baba Attar Singh Ji's childhood.
So they went into education mainly from the Gurmukh side.
Only the Gurmukh side.
Only from the Gurmukh side, sorry. And then from that onwards, they joined the army?
So Baba Attar Singh Ji, they grow up into Naujawan. And they asked their mother, because at that time, you got to remember that there were many Gurmukhs in the army. Sant Baba
Karam Singh Ji?
Karam Singh Ji, Hoti Mardan wale. Baba Attar Singh Ji, Redu Sahib wale. A lot of these Mahapurush, they stayed in the army. And at that time, the army was a place of very Tarmi people. Baba Attar Singh Ji had this itcha to go into the army, and they asked their Mataji, and the Mataji didn't want them to go into the army. But jado dekhya, because Baba Attar Singh Ji had brothers, I think, as well. They had a younger brother. They were the oldest son. So naturally, at that time, even now, the eldest son is seen as someone who's going to look after the parents, or in Punjabi culture, someone who's going to take on the family duties.
Hanji.
Baba Attar Singh Ji had no interest. And Baba Attar Singh Ji said to their Mataji, Mataji, sanu kartar da hukam hai. This, I'm not going into the army with my own choice. This is a hukam that I've received from Vaheguru. And Maharaj sanu ek vadde audhe te pauna hai. They're going to put us in a very high rank. So Baba Attar Singh Ji here is talking about spiritual rank. But to the mother, she thinks, Mataji is thinking, ha, both vadde officer banuge. But Baba Attar Singh Ji doesn't stay in the army for long. The army is just an excuse for them. Because in the army, when they join the army, that's when they get the sangat that they need of like a Mahapurush. And Mataji nu kende ke sanu agya do. Because if we see this going that they would never do anything without the agya of their parents. So reluctantly seeing how adamant Baba Attar Singh Ji was, and these bachans that Baba Attar Singh Ji said, that Mataji gave the agya. And in 1883, Baba Attar Singh Ji joins the army. They're registered at Dharamkot. And 1 year, you wouldn't go out into any sort of army duty. You'd stay in the Torpakhana and you'd learn like the duties of the army. You'd get training. So, ek saal vaste, they stayed in Dharamkot. And then in the Torpakhana, they used to get a lot of work. Baba Attar Singh Ji's idea was, because when they heard, or they probably knew about many other Gurmukhs who were in the army, and they got a lot of time to do Bhagti in the army. But when Baba Attar Singh Ji entered the army, or they entered the Torpakhana, which is where all the torps or the artillery is kept, and they were given, it's like anywhere. When you start a job, you're not going to go to the highest rank straight away. You're going to start very at the bottom. And Baba Attar Singh Ji was given a lot of work. They had to clean, they had to look after, they had to clean all the torpa. And they would never get any summer to do Simran in a Kant. All their time would be going, just doing all these jobs. And their desire was to sit in seclusion and do Simran. And Subedar Dalal Singh, who was the Subedar at that time, wo bhi bahut dharmi purush sige. So they were someone who used to do a lot of Simran themselves. And Baba Attar Singh Ji went to them and they said that I entered the army thinking that I could do my duties here, but I could also spend a lot of time doing Simran. And it's the opposite. Subedar Ji realized that Baba Attar Singh Ji wants to do Bhagti, and then they changed them. So from that initial sort of time period, we have to stay and train in the Torpakhana or do these sort of menial jobs of cleaning and so on. They advanced them and they put them into the 54th Baltan, so what we say regiment. And that regiment was the one that Subedar Dalal Singh was in charge of. So Baba Attar Singh Ji then goes and joins that regiment. And Baba Attar Singh Ji's primary interest was Simran, but that doesn't mean that in their other duties they lacked or they were lazy or anything. They would do everything.
Hanji.
And even marksmanship, so in terms of firing and getting all the targets and practicing, they received the first, so that the highest. Of all the new recruits, they were the highest.
Nice.
So Baba Attar Singh Ji, ek wari aaye wapas, so they join this regiment. And Ikavadi during that time, not long after, they come back to their village. And this is when this sort of girl starts about their marriage. Ek Jivan Singh si from a pind, but Rukhe pind. And they saw Sant Ji. And because Sant Ji's build, like you see in their pictures as well, they had a very tall build and they were very strong. And they had a pratap as well. They had this sort of glory about them. They had a glow. Seeing that, he bahut prabhavit ho gaya. And he thought that this is the type of person that I want my daughter to marry.
Hanji.
So he doesn't say to Baba Attar Singh Ji directly, because that's not how things used to work. He went to the Mataji and Pitaji, or Babaji, and by the time he went to Babaji's, Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji's parents, Baba Attar Singh Ji had gone back to the army. And he said, look, I want to get my daughter married to Baba Attar Singh Ji. And the parents, they agreed to the rishta straight away. They said, it's fine. And they sent a letter to Baba Attar Singh Ji. Baba Attar Singh Ji said that menu hukum nahi hega to marry.
Hanji.
Because Baba Attar Singh Ji, look, we're not bringing the topic here that should we get married or not. Obviously in Gurmat, Grishta Dharam is Pradhan, but we also have them Mahapurush who just dedicate their life to Simran. We went through this in the last podcast as well.
Hanji.
So Babaji sends that letter, and he says instead of same time he doesn't want to disappoint the family, break a rishta. You got to remember sort of the cultural norms of that time. If you broke a rishta at that time, it's very hard to get another rishta.
Hanji.
Because people would just start assuming things
About the girl, right?
about the girl.
Hanji.
And Baba Attar Singh Ji said कि मेरा जरा छोटा भाई Jai Singh Ji was not too younger than Baba Attar Singh Ji. ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਿਸ਼ਤਾ ਕਰਾ ਦਿਓ.
Hanji.
So in that way, Baba Attar Singh Ji basically said, Baba Attar Singh Ji already knew that his life wasn't to just settle down and have a family life. They knew that they were on a mission. That mission was to do prachar. So they didn't want to get married. That was their own personal choice.
And then after joining the army, how did Babaji then take Amrit then? Was it for the Sangha at the army or was it somewhere else?
ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਆਰਮੀ ਨੂੰ ਜੁਆਇਨ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ, Sikh regiment, ਉਹ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਛਕਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ.
Okay.
There was a rule. Now that rule has been taken out. But in that time, if they hadn't already taken Amrit, they were Shikar Amrit. Because British ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਪਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ the Khalsa Rayat is what keeps discipline.
Hanji.
And they get Shakti from this. The Khalsa get Shakti from Amrit.
Hanji.
So that was part of the army manifesto.
So if you didn't take Amrit, you couldn't join the army as a Sikh?
Yeah, you couldn't remain in the army.
Oh, wow.
So you could join the army on the agreement that you would take Amrit. And Amrit ਛਕਾਉਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਖਾਸ ਪੰਜ ਪਿਆਰੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. The regiment. And so ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ Baba Attar Singh Ji joins the army. At that time, they hadn't taken Amrit. They Giani Thakur Singh Ji, who ਕਾਫੀ ਵਿਦਵਾਨ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹ, Bhai Thakur Singh Ji, Giani. They've written a lot of granths as well, old granths. They're not in print anymore. ਉਹ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ. The Gursikh that I mentioned before, who had a lot of effect on Baba Attar Singh Ji, that was Bhai Jodh Singh Ji. Every regiment had a Granthi Singh.
Hanji.
ਉਹ Granthi Singh Bhai Jodh Singh Ji ਸੀਗੇ. Their sole duty is just to read Gurbani, do part, hold the diwans for the army, for that regiment. Bhai Jodh Singh Ji ਬਹੁਤ ਉੱਤਮ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਸੀਗੇ. They had a very high avastha. So Bhai Jodh Singh Ji, Granthi, Giani Thakur Singh Ji, who had come, and Giani Thakur Singh Ji came by themselves, and then Subedar Dalal Singh as well, and Havaldar Hira Singh, who were both very high avastha Gursikhs. These four Singhs got ready to do the Amrit Sanchar, but there's something missing, the fifth Singh.
That's hard to say.
So four Singhs are ready. So Bhai Thakur Singh Ji has come, especially from Amrit Sahib, who's going to be the Jathedar of the Panj Piare, the head of the Panj Piare. Bhai Jodh Singh's already there because he's the Granthi. Two people from the army who had a very high Gursikhi Jivan. They also get ready to be in the Panj Piare. They're looking around, there's no fifth Singh. All the other people in the army, none of them, they're going to be taking the Amrit.
Hanji.
Who else is going to do seva on the Panj Piare? So they come into this sort of situation where Amrit Sanchar might not happen because there's not a fifth Singh to do the seva. And very amazing incident happens. The four Singhs are worried, okay, what we're going to do, how we're going to do the Amrit Sanchar. ਉਸੇ ਹੀ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੱਕ ਤਕੜਾ, very strong and pratapi Nihung Singh. So Nihung Singh, full in his bana, shastar, he just turns up, blue bana, and he's got a glow, he's got pratap, prakash coming from his face. He just turns up at the Guru Kar. Just randomly, like he was just passing by, and he comes to Matha take at the Guru Kar. The Giani Thakur Singh Ji, Bhai Thakur Singh Ji, he says straight away, ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪੰਜਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਸੀ, ਪੰਜਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਭੇਜ ਦਿੱਤਾ. ਤੇ this Nihung Singh, he says ਕਿ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਤਾਂ ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਕਲਗੀਆਂ ਵਾਲੇ ਦੇ ਹੁਕਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸੇ ਕਾਰਜ ਵਾਸਤੇ kamar kase karke aaya hai. So this incident, it's not like hearsay. Giani Thakur Singh Ji, who did the Amrit Sanchar, they told this to Sant Attar Singh Ji. So as I said, the book of Sant Attar Singh, he went around interviewing all the people. So even the Gursikh who shakar Amrit to Baba Attar Singh Ji, they went and met them. And Giani Thakur Singh Ji told this to Sant Attar Singh Ji, and they've written this in the book. That Singh, that Nihung Singh, no one knows his name, no one knows who he was. He said that I've been sent by Guru Gobind Singh Ji. His Khalsa ta tyar bar tyar Kalgiya wale ne bhejya. Guru Gobind Singh Ji has sent just for this courage. So ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕੀਤੀ. And Baba Attar Singh Ji, the book of Baba Attar Singh Ji, if you know Punjabi, I would say read that book. Just the way he's written it is beautiful. And just because the way he's written it is so beautiful, I'm going to just read that. That ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਫਿਰ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਮਰਿਆਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਸੰਚਾਰ, that the Jathedar of the Panj Piare or the Granthi Singh, they do the Sudai of the other Panj Singhs. So the Amrit Sanchar doesn't just start like the 5 Singhs get together and start preparing the Amrit. First, the Panj Piare will do their Peshi or they do their Sudai. What that means is that each one of them will be interviewed by the Jathedar, right? In sense that they will be asked that you're going to lag in the Panj Piare, you're going to be part of the Panj Piare. Do you do your Nitnem? Are you free from the Bajr Krat? Is your Singani, so the person you're married to, are they tyar bar tyar in the Rat? So they ask all these questions. And then the Panj Piare, the Singh is going to do the seva, he will say, ke man karke asi sada bhulan harya. So they don't say ke haan main vadiya Rat vich. In Nimrata, they say this, that man karke sada bhulan harya. That with our mind, we always make mistakes. But Maharaj di kirpa de naal, Guru Gobind Singh di kirpa de naal, sreer karke asi tyar bar tyar hai. So then they go through all the Panj Singhs. They ask them, have you done any of the Char Bajr Krat? What is your Jivan like? Then after that, then they call in the rest of the Amrit Ablakis. The people are going to take the Amrit. They Sara Sudai karke. Fir Bhai Jodh Singh Ji was the Jathedar actually at that time. So in the Panj Singhs, Bhai Teja Singh's written that Bhai Jodh Singh Ji was the Jathedar. And the Jathedar just means they do the Ardas and they tell the Rat. So Bhai Jodh Singh Ji, they did Ardas and the Khanda hath vich fad ke ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕੀਤੀ ਕਿ ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਸੱਚੇ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਕਿ ਹੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ, ਮਾੜੇ ਹਾਂ ਚੰਗੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇਰੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤੇਰੀ ਓਟ ਤੇ ਆਸਰਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਹੁਕਮ ਪਾਲਣ ਲਈ ਕਮਰ ਕਸਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ. That whether we're good or bad, we're yours. And according to your hukam, taking your asra, taking your support, that we're going to tyar Amrit, but we have no gun. As Sant Gyani Guru Bachan Singh Ji writes, that when the Panj Singh get together and they do the Ardas, at that time Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj enters their body. So meaning Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj aap ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰਵੇਸ਼ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ. At that time they're no longer their previous self, right? Just during that time of the Amrit Sanchar, from that Ardas to the end Ardas, they become the form of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. But they still remain in Nimrata, and they say that we're nothing, Maharaj, you're going to do this courage. And at that time in the Ardas, Bhai Jodh Singh Ji said, ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਗੁਣ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ. Then they read the Shabad, ਹਮ avgun ਭਰੇ ਏਕ ਗੁਣ ਨਾਹੀ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਛਾੜ ਬਿਖੈ ਬਿਖਾਈ. So read that Shabad with a lot of prem, and they said, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਿਰਦ ਬਾਣੀ ਦੀ ਲਾਜ ਰੱਖਣੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਲਾ ਦੁਆਰਾ. So with your kala, with your shakti, ਪ੍ਰੇਮ ਰਸ, ਬੀਰ ਰਸ, ਨਾਮ ਰਸ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ ਕਰਨਾ, ਅਤੇ ਜੋ ਭੁਜੰਗੀ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਦਰਗਾਹ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਦੀ ਦਾਤ ਲੈਣ ਲਈ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹੋਏ ਹਨ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹਿਰਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰੇਮ ਰਸ, ਬੀਰ ਰਸ, ਨਾਮ ਰਸ ਸਿੰਚਣਾ ਅਤੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਕੇਸਾ ਸਵਾਸਾ ਸੰਗ ਨਿਭਾਉਣੀ. So they do this ardas ਕਿ ਉਹ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ, you're going to do kirpa. That we don't have any gun. You're going to do the kirpa, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, that all these puchangis, so these Singhs who have come in your darbar to take Amrit, you're going to, only you can put in them prem ras. You can put prem, you can put that beer ras, you can put nam ras in them. And then sikhi kesa swasa sang neboni, that till their last breath, may they live Sikhi and keep their case intact. So in this way, the Panj Piare did the Ardas, then Hukamnama Sahib happened, then the Panj Singhs sat in Bir Asan, and then they started preparing the Amrit. ਜਦੋਂ Amrit ਤਿਆਰ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਫਿਰ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਰੀ-ਵਾਰੀ Amrit ਛਕਾਇਆ, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਗੁਰਮੰਤਰ, ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ, ਨਾਮ ਦੀ ਦਾਤ 5 ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ to Baba Attar Singh Ji. ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਸੰਚਾਰ ਸੰਪੂਰਨ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਨਿਹੰਗ ਸਿੰਘ ਸੀਗਾ, ਸਦਾ ਅਕਾਲੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਉਹਨੇ ਦੇਗ ਛਕਿਆ। ਸੋ ਕੜਾਹ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦ ਦਾ ਦੇਗ which was given at the time of the Amrit Sanchar, he had that deg, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉੱਠ ਕੇ he walked out. And no one knows where he went or kaun siga. No one asked his name. Even Giani Singh Ji, who told this story, he didn't know what his name was or who he was. When Amrit Sanchar seva karke, he just walked off. And he went into the distance and no one knows where he went. Who he was, all we can do anuman, and from what he said himself, ke Maharaj ne mainu bheja. That's like the amazing things that happen. Baba Attar Singh Ji, Amrit Sanchar. And then when Baba Attar Singh Ji took Amrit, it had such an effect on them that they had no desire to really stay in the army or such anymore. But what they started to do is that they stayed in the Guru Kar of the army. So Giani Jodh Singh Ji, who was the Granthi of that regiment, but they were also the Jathedar of the Panj Piare at that time. Their Jivan was both Ucha Sucha Jivan. So they used to spend all day doing Simran. All day they just sit in Simran, reading Bani. And Baba Attar Singh Ji talked to Subedar Dalal Singh. Subedar Dalal Singh Ji, who was also in the Panj Piare of Baba Attar Singh Ji. He was also like the boss of Baba Attar Singh Ji in terms of the army. He knew that Baba Attar Singh Ji is here to do Bhagti. He gave him permission that other than joining the daily parade and sort of Hazri Loni, what they say, is basically getting registered every day and joining that parade that they do. You don't need to do guard duty, because all the other army ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫੌਜਦਾਰ ਸੀਗੇ or ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫੌਜੀ ਸੀਗੇ, they had to do guard duty. So they spend many hours doing guarding the regiment. So he got shutti from that. But Baba Attar Singh Ji would still take part in training with the Shastar, and again their marksmanship was the best. But Jadatar, they would not get involved. They would just stay in the Guru Kar of the army regiment. They kind of became like the Gadavai or the Sevadar of Giani Jodh Singh Ji. So ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗ੍ਰੰਥੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨੀ, because ਉਹ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ. Baba Attar Singh Ji would wake at 2 a.m. every single day, and the first thing we would do is charu of all the Guru Kar. Sara Guru Kar da charu karna. We often forget that the Mahapurush are showing us that we need to do Simran, because our mind has got so much dirt of barb on it. We forget Hathi Seva ਵੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ, ਕਿ ਹੱਥੀ ਸੇਵਾ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ, ਭਾਂਡਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ, ਜੋੜਿਆਂ ਸਾਧ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ, ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਭੁੱਲ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ this is also a part of Sikhi, very important part. Baba Attar Singh, the first thing we do is charu, get the charu and do charu all around, like broom. ਦਰੀਆ ਵਿਛਾਉਣੀਆਂ, ਚਾਦਰਾਂ ਵਿਛਾਉਣੀਆਂ, ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਪਾਣ ਤਾਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ, ਨਿਤਨੇਮ ਕਰਨਾ, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਫॉर ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੋਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ. ਐਂਡ ਦੈਨ ਪਰੇਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਜਾਣਾ, ਇਟ ਗੋ, ਆਪਣੀ ਹਾਜ਼ਰੀ ਵੀ ਲਾਉਣੀ. ਫਿਰ ਬਾਕੀ ਦਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਦੇ would learn from ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੋਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ. ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੋਧ ਸਿੰਘ would teach them Santhia, teach them ਅਰਥ of ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ. ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੋਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਛਕਾਉਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਫਿਰ ਆਪ ਛਕਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. They would never eat before ਗਿਆਨੀ ਜੋਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ. They would always make them ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ first. ਫਿਰ 9 ਵਜੇ 9 p.m. after everything was finished, they'd go, ਉੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਦਰਿਆ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ near the regiment, very similar to Baba Karam Singh Ji Hoti Mardan wale. And then from 9 p.m. to Amrit Vela, they wouldn't sleep as well. They would sit all night doing Simran next to the river. Gurbani parni, Sukhmani Sahib da jaap karna, Gurmantar da jaap karna. Just seeing this, people start to call Baba Attar Singh Ji Sadh. Ye ta sadhu haiga.
So whilst being in the army then, you just spoke about, their duties all day, doing seva, doing Simran all night. What inspired them to take it to the next level?
So Baba Attar Singh Ji would see Bhai Jodh Singh Ji, and Bhai Jodh Singh Ji would sit for hours and hours just doing Simran, and not one ang of their body would move. When we sit down to do Simran, we're just shuffling around, we're moving our body around. He would sit in such dhyan, he's so immersed in the Simran, that Baba Attar Singh would know it's not even one ang of his body is moving. And mukto prakash hunda si, and from their face you could see that they're in bliss, they're in anand. Kheda hunda si, nanak bhagta sada vigas. So Baba Attar Singh Ji, one day he asked Granthi Jodh Singh Ji, Giani Ji, inne ਘੰਟੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ? I see you sitting there, but you're not there. It doesn't look like you're there. It's like you've gone from your body. Your body is just still. Bhai Jodh Singh, it shows the avastha of Bhai Jodh Singh Ji. What we talk about, Bhai Jagraj Singh used to say that the Dasam Dwar is like that portal to experience Vaheguru, right? Bhai Jodh Singh Ji was someone who'd got to that avastha that via their Dasam Dwar, they used to enter Sachkhand. They used to experience Vaheguru. Bhai Jodh Singh Ji said at that time, he didn't answer with his own words. He said a shabad. And that shabad is written by Bhagt Ravidas Ji. Bhagt Ravidas Ji's shabad is Begum Pura Sahar ko nao, Dukh andoho nahi tehe thao. So Bhai Jodh Singh Ji said to Sant Attar Singh Ji that question, that where do you go? He goes, I'll go to that Begum Pura. I'll go to that Asthan. I'll go to that Avastha, which is where you're one with Vaheguru. So Begum Pura. So Begam, where there's no sorrow. Because Vaheguru is Sat Chetan Anand, they're the form of bliss. There's no dukh, there's no pain. Vaheguru is the form of bliss. So in that avastha, we go and we merge into that form of bliss. Begum Pura Sahar ko nao. That Sahar, that place that I go to, or our Shahar, Bhagavad Ravidas Ji says, that Antarivi Shahar, or that Sachkhand, that avastha, where Vaheguru is manifest, that is Begum Pura, where there's no gum, where there's no sog. Dukh andoho nahi tehe thao. And there's no dukh, there's no pain there. Te andoho, sansa, doubt, kuch nahi hai hote. We have these doubts before reaching the avastha. Before the avastha of Jivanmukht, where they're experiencing Sachkhand while they're still alive. They're experiencing Vaheguru while they're still in this body. So the Shabad's really long, but just we'll read up to the how. Na tasvees, khiraj na mal, khauf na khata, na tars jawal. So Bhagt Ravidas Ji says to the Sikhs, or the Bhagats, the Jagyasus who were asking at that time to Bhagat Ji, Bhagat Ji says that na tasvees, khiraj na mal. Tasvees kande chinta nu. Uthe koi chinta nahi hai. So this Shabad, which is quite long, basically Bhagavad Ravidas Ji is talking about the experience of being one with Vaheguru. And Granthi Jodh Singh Ji, via the Shabad, they basically said to Sant Attar Singh Ji that that's the avastha, that's where we go. We go to meet Vaheguru. We become one with Vaheguru in that avastha. That desh, that Sachkhand Rupi desh of Vaheguru, ਅਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ. ਤੇ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ did a ਬੇਨਤੀ to ਗ੍ਰੰਥੀ ਜੋਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, ਇਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰੋ, ਕਿ ਇਹ ਦਾਸ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰੋ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਵੀ ਉਹੀ ਦੇਸ਼ ਜਾਵਾਂ. That desh, that country or that avastha you go to, that Sachkhand, that Begumpura, where there's no sorrow, where there's just bliss, ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰੋ, that I can also visit that desh, I can also go to that desh, where you go every day. Then Granthi Jodh Singh said, ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ ਹੋਏ, because in ਆਮ ਕਰਕੇ Baba Attar Singh is doing a lot of seva, but aam karke people do seva for worldly gain, or they do seva because they need something in this world, right? When Granthi Jodh Singh saw that Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji was a true spiritual seeker, he got very happy. But he said that if you want this avastha, if you want to go to that Begumpura, then you have to do Simran. You have to do Kalna. You have to put effort, and you have to do mehnat, you have to do kamai. And they said, Shabbat e surat da mel karna pena. That Gurmantar which we blessed you with, now you've got to do kamai of it. So the Panj Piare, they've blessed you with that Gurmantar. Now focus and do kamai of that naam, that Gurmantar. And Granthi Jodh Singh Ji then went to detail about the stages of Simran. What we say is Shabbat e surat da mel, our concentration, our surti, infusing it with the Shabbat, becoming one. So Sabad Guru Surat Ton Chela. And the stages of Abhyas, Baba Teja Singh Ji then writes that Granthi Jodh Singh Ji explained You've got to go through these steps. And as you go through these steps, holi, you will also reach this avastha. And just very simply, the 4 stages which are explained, Baikari, Maddam, Pasanti, and Para. So, the Simran always starts from Baikari, Rasna Dwara. Holi internalizes. This avastha we hear of Rom Simran, every hair vibrating Simran, Swas Simran. These avastha, they don't just automatically happen. Mehnat karke, kamai karke, then you get to that avastha with the kirpa of the Guru. So the starting is always Baikari, Rasna de naal. Jaban di madad de naal. We all start on this stage. We say Vaheguru. We're saying it with our rasna. And with our kan, we're listening to the tuni, we're listening to the sound of that Simran. So, oh hega Baikari. That's the first stage. Everyone has to start Baikari. As we do loads of Baikari jap, not 5 minutes, not once a day saying Vaheguru. This means ਬਹੁਤ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਕਮਾਈ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਬੈਖਰੀ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜਪੀ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਦੀ ਧੁਨੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣਾ ਕਨਸੈਂਟਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਬੈਖਰੀ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ ਹੌਲੀ ਕੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆਪੇ ਹੀ this isn't like you force yourself to go into that stage. What the Mahaprabhu said is that these stages ਆਪੇ ਹੀ you get to that stage where ਆਪੇ ਹੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ
so naturally
ਜਿਵੇਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬੈਖਰੀ ਰਾਹੀਂ with your tongue you're doing simran what happens is you go to maddam the next stage maddam is now you're not using your jeeb but ਕੰਠ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਹੋਈ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਕੰਠ means this area of the throat simran is happening but you're not moving your jeeb ਜੀਬ ਦੇ ਰਸਨਾ ਤੋਂ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਹੀ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਇੰਨਾ ਰਸਨਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੰਨਾ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਆਪੇ ਹੀ ਰਸਨਾ ਤੋਂ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਸਿਮਰਨ it starts to vibrate ਫਿਰ ਹੌਲੀ ਮੱਧਮਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ ਬਾਬਾ ਈਸ਼ਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ talks about that every stage the sort of the fall of it just gets greater and greater so Baikari the maddam then pasanti ਜਿਹੜਾ pasanti ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਹਿਰਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹਿਰਦਾ the heart area this area ਤੇ as it advances into the ਹਿਰਦਾ area ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਸਵਾਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲਣ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦਾ every breath starts to say Vaheguru and then when it goes into the ਸਵਾਸ ਹੌਲੀ ਹਿਰਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ ਫਿਰ ਪਰਾ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ ਪਰਾ ਅਵਸਥਾ is when ਸੁਤੇ ਸਿੱਧ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਹੈਗਾ ਸੁਰਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਨ ਲੀਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ and that area where the Simran now starts to vibrate is known as the nabhi. So the nabhi is our navel area. ਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਵਾਸਾਂ ਦਾ ਗੰਢ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ it's like the gand of our swas and like another side point we hear Mahapurush Gurmukhs know when they're going to go because ਇਸ ਸਵਾਸਾਂ ਦਾ ਗੰਢ ਖੁੱਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਥੋੜਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ they know ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਹੈਗਾ so ਨਾਭੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਨਾ ਫਿਰ ਰੋਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ so ਪਰਾ ਨਾਭੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ every single hair starts to recite Vaheguru that's why now the fall is like times 1000 so ਇਹ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਸੁਰ ਦੇ ਮੇਲ ਜਦੋਂ ਨਾਭੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੋਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਗੁਰਮੁਖ ਰੋਮ ਹਰ ਧਿਆਵੇ every single hair Vaheguru starts to vibrate every single swas to doing Simran ਜਿਨਾ ਸਾਸ ਗਿਰਾਸ ਨਾ ਵਿਸਰੇ every single breath doing Simran and that Simran is happening automatically ਤੁਰਦੇ ਫਿਰਦੇ they're doing ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਾਤਾਂ they're doing their sansari karaj they're doing their job right they're doing everything but the Simran is going on ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਅਨਾਹਤ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਅਵਸਥਾ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ so Granthi Jol Singh Ji explains, if you do kamai, holi you'll go through all these avasthas, and then you'll get to this stage where you enter Sachkhand. You'll get to this stage where you have darshan of Vaheguru. You'll get to that stage where you become one with Vaheguru while you're still alive, Jivan Mukti. Idda hunda na, when we hear bachans, we all hear loads of bachan and katha and so on. It goes in one ear and goes out the other. Ek kaan ch enter karda, dusre to nikal janda ya. पर देखो बाबा अत्तर सिंह जी ने बचन सुने पल्ले बन ले उसी वक्त सिमरन शुरू करता उन्होंने ते बाबा अत्तर सिंह जी इस समय ना they just realized that the only aim or the mission of my life is to get to that same place where Granthi Jodh Singh Ji's got to. I need to get to that stage. ਤੇ ਉਸੇ ਸਮੇਂ 1887 ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਪਿਤਾ ਜੀ ਉਹ ਚੜ੍ਹਾਈ ਕਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਤੇ ਮਾਤਾ ਭੋਲੀ ਜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਲੈਟਰ ਆਇਆ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਆਇਆ ਮਾਤਾ ਜੀ said ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਘਰ ਆਓ ਤੇ ਸੰਤ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ they told the army ਕਿ my ਪਿਤਾ ਜੀ passed away so the army gave him leave ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਇੰਨਾ ਵਿਰਾਗ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਵਿਰਾਗ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਸੀਗਾ that their father's death had that effect on them that they realized that the world is temporary. And there's different types of Vairag. There's loads of different. Mand Vairag.
What does Vairag mean, Ji?
Vairag, Vair, we could say is Viparit, opposite, which means opposite. And Rag means more, or that attachment, the love of attachment. So it's not talking about the love for Vaheguru, that Sachi Preet, it's the Chuthi Preet that we have with the Dunya, with Maya.
Anji.
So when our mind turns opposite from that more, that's Vairag.
Okay.
We get that longing to be with Vaheguru. Until we don't have Vairag, we can't escape Maya. Gurbani says, Bin Vairag na chutas Maya. Without that longing for Vaheguru, how can we ever even make the effort
Anji.
To become one with Vaheguru? So there's different types of Vairag. One type of Vairag is Manda Vairag. One type of Vairag is Karan Vairag. These Vairags are like, for example, you see someone pass away. Or we have stories like Par Trihari, who was a great king. And to put it simply, his wife cheats on him.
Anji.
Right? And due to that, he goes into a state of Vairag. Right? Or he leaves everything. He sees everything as false. Right? Then you have some examples, someone passes away. And Karan Vairag is that Vairag where there's a dohra. I can't remember it now, but the meaning of that dohra is like a gust of wind comes, and that gust of wind picks up a blade of grass and it goes into the air, goes very high into the air. Once that wind goes, that same blade of grass goes right where it was, onto the floor, right? So Karan Vairag is due to some reason, for a short period of time, you go very high into the state of Vairag and you start to think that all the dunya is chuti, that Maya, why am I engrossed in all these false things? That they're not even going to go with me, right? I should be engrossed in Simran. I should be, Bhai Prapt Manuk de Huriya, Gobind Milane ki eh teri bariya. This is my wari. Right? Avar kaj tere kitna kaam, mil sad sang de paj keval naam. Nothing else is going to be of any use except for sad sang de vich asi naam japya. But then you realize, what am I doing? But then, after that, like when someone passes away, for example, we have this sort of garden Vairag. For that very short period, someone we're attached to, someone with a lot of prem for, we get some form of Vairag. But then, once we go back into the sansar, just like that blade of grass that goes into the air, and it goes all the way back down once the air goes. Right?
Yeah.
After some time, we go back into Maya, we go back to the sansar, and we just forget everything.
Anji.
So that wasn't the type of Vairag that Baba Attar Singh Ji had. They had that Vairag, which we call Tar Tibar Tar Tam Vairag. That's the highest stage of Vairag. We start to see everything as false, and only Vaheguru is the reality. We want to join the Vaheguru. Baba Attar Singh Ji, at that time, they realized that this life is temporary and there's no time to waste. They just pull that led them to Hazur Sahib.
So how was the journey for them to Hazur Sahib? Did they just leave the army straight away, or did they go home first? How did that exactly happen, Ji?
They didn't go home. They had that tang, this longing that was Than of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, where Maharaj Kala is Pratak, Shakti of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj. And we hear all the different Mahapurush. They went to Hazur Sahib.
Anji. You pretty much answered the question, but why Hazur Sahib then, of all the places?
Yeah. Utthe Maharaj Kala. Those who have been, they know.
Anji.
Whoever's been to Hazur Sahib, as soon as you step into the Takat Asthan,
Anji.
you know that feeling. The Maharaj uthe Pratak hai gaya. That's the Sharda of the Gursikhs. So Baba Attar Singh Ji doesn't go back home. They just start on foot. So they were at that time, they were at a place called Ghazi Khan, which I think now is in like Pakistan. and they just started walking towards Hazur Sahib.
That's really far, right?
ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ there wasn't like Sachkhand Express to Hazur Sahib,
Planes.
ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ you got the planes which go from all over. You got Amritsar, Delhi, Mumbai. You go there and you get a plane all the way to Nanded.
Yeah.
ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਇੱਦਾਂ. ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਤੁਰ ਕੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਪੈਦਲ. They walk by foot. ਤੇ ਕੁਝ ਥੋੜਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਟ੍ਰੇਨ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਚ I think so in the book is written that some they took some train, but ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾਤਰ 80% of their journey they took walking.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
The way that they would walk as well, it gives a prerna to those who like to walk. ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਰਦੇ ਆ make that safal as well.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
ਤੁਰਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੁਣ ਕਈ ਲੰਮੇ ਲੰਮੇ walk ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
When you're doing a hike or you're walking, forget all of that. Even when you're normally just walking.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
Baba Attar Singh Ji, when they used to pick up their left foot, they would say Vahe, and their right foot, they say Guru. Vaheguru, Vaheguru, idda. And Baba Attar Singh Ji, kai 100 mil, many hundreds of miles, they would just pass just doing Simran. With each step, one step they say Vahe, the second they say Guru. ਇਹ ਧੁਨੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਮਸਤ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ. Just that ਧੁਨੀ of Vaheguru, they'd be so must, be so engrossed and so intoxicated by that Simran, they wouldn't realize how far they're walking or how long they're walking. Baba Attar Singh Ji told this girl to Sant Baba Teja Singh themselves. They used to say ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ ਕਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਨਾਲ ਕਦਮ ਦੀ ਤਾਰ ਜੋੜ ਲਵੇ. The rhythm of their walking, join it to the shabad. So you're walking slow, do that Simran slow. Walking faster, then with your steps, do faster Simran. And then Rato Raat So ko nasya jave nahi thakega. So this is the formula. You can walk for hundreds of miles, but you won't get tired. Keep doing Simran. And then Baba Attar Singh Ji said to Baba Teja Singh Ji that the Parat and Gursikhs, we often say that how did the Parat and Gursikhs walk for hundreds and hundreds of miles when the Mughals were after them? Because some had kore, but not every Gursikh had kore. They had to walk on foot. ਤੇ ਪੁਰਾਤਨ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਦੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਹੀ ਧਾਵਿਆ ਅਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਗੁਰਸੇਵਾ ਦੇ ਕੰਮਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੰਮ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਸੀ. Right? That it was this ਤਾਕਤ of the shabad that as they used to walk, they used to do Vaheguru, Vaheguru. And doing that, they would get that ਤਾਕਤ. Doing that Simran, they would get the ਤਾਕਤ. ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਕੋਈ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਮੁਗਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਧਾਵਾ, ਕੋਈ ਅਟੈਕ ਹੋ ਜਾਵੇ, ਉਸੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਤਿਆਰ ਬਰ ਤਿਆਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਹਾਂਜੀ. That's what they would get the strength. So many hundreds of miles Baba Attar Singh Ji would walk. ਜਦੋਂ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਵੇਲਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਰੁਕ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਟਿਊਬਵੈਲ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਖੂਹ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਵੈਲ ਹੁੰਦਾ, wherever there's a well, ਉੱਥੇ so wherever there was a well or tube well or lake, river, anything, a source of fresh water, ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਕਰਨਾ. ਹਾਂਜੀ. ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੁਟ ਜਾਣਾ. They would get immersed in Simran, then they would do their Nitnem, and then as soon as they'd done their Nitnem, they'd start walking again. That was their journey. Amrit Vela kadi nahi khunjaya. They'd never let go of their Nitnem. They'd never let go of Ishnan. And such that even Prashadda, they never worried about it. Now, if we're going to go on a journey, we think about food. Yeah. Right? All our supplies that we need. Baba Attar Singh Ji didn't take any supplies. They just had that Prosan Maharaj. They had that Prosan Guru Gobind Singh Ji that I'm going to your takat, you will provide for me. Anji. So on the way, just Kudrati, there used to be Dharamsals. Places where people would join many Dharams and they'd do Simran. There'd be Guru Kars. There'd be Gurudwara Sahib. But certain times there'd be places where there's no Guru Kar. Anji. And just by chance, there might be some Dharamsal there or religious place there. And utte, they prashada hunda ta shak lende. If they arrived at some Guru Kar, if there's prashada, they'd have it. They wouldn't ask. If they saw prashada, they'd have it. And if nahi siga, they just walk off. They had that avastha, which Gurbani talks about. Kahe re man chitva hai uddam ja ahar har jiyo parya. Sail pathar meh jant upaye, taka rijik aage karta raya. We don't need to worry that whatever's destined for us, Vaheguru will arrange it for us to come right to us. We don't need to do any chinta. The Baba Attar Singh Ji, jitthe vi unnu prashada chaida si, mil janda si. And then je nahi milda si, they wouldn't complain, they'd just carry on walking. ਇਹ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, but it would have taken a while.
Definitely.
ਕਾਫੀ ਸਮਾਂ stopping and then walking all the way from Punjab to Nanded. ਤੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਸਮਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਫਿਰ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ they reach ਤਖਤ ਸੱਚਖੰਡ Sri Hazur Sahib. Just when they saw the colors means like the tops of the gummads, the domes, and they're covered with gold, and they saw that shining in the sun, Baba Attar Singh Ji went into a state of ismad. ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਡੰਡੌਤ ਕੀਤਾ. As soon as they saw the colors, still a bit further away from Takhat Sahib, as soon as they realized that I reached to Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj's Takhat, right at that moment they did a dandot. Dandot means all the angs of the body laying it flat, namaskar, salutation to Maharaj. ਫਿਰ Takhat Sahib they arrived there and they had darshan of Maharaj's Shastar and Guru Granth Sahib Ji, Sri Dasam Granth Sahib Ji Prakash. ਤੇ ਅਗਲੇ ਦਿਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਗੋਦਾਵਰੀ ਤੇ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ like today we have Jathedar Baba Kulwant Singh Ji, who's the main sevadar who goes into the Takhat Sahib, and they're the only one who are allowed inside the inner chamber of the Takhat Sahib, and only they can go in there and do seva of Maharaj's Shastar and the Takhat. In the same way, ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ Bhai Nanu Singh Ji, they were the head pujari or the head Jathedar at that time. And Bhai Nanu Singh Ji, as soon as they saw Baba Attar Singh Ji, they realized that they're not some armed Purush. Baba Nanu Singh Ji vi kamai wale sige, that they used to seva of Maharaj's Darbar, Maharaj's Takhat. So they recognized that Baba Attar Singh Ji is a saint. There's someone who is a Jagyasu, there's someone who is a Byasi of Simran. Not only that, they saw the Nimrata and Prem of Baba Attar Singh Ji. And they realizing that Baba Attar Singh Ji was such a special soul, they said to Baba Attar Singh Ji that you're not going to stay anywhere else, you're going to stay in my own bunga. Wow. So this is the head Jathedar of Hazur Sahib. As soon as he see Baba Attar Singh Ji, they say to him that you're going to stay in my bunga. You're going to stay in where I stay. Also, now when we go in Hazur Sahib, the bunga of the Jathedar is like right next to Takhat Sahib. Na? Also, according to Baba Teja Singh Ji, the bunga of the Jathedar was next to Godavari.
Okay.
So it was next to the river itself. The Nagina Ghat Gurdwara Sahib, where Maharaj chucked the Nagina into the river, ਉਹ ਸਥਾਨ ਤੇ ਪੁਜਾਰੀ ਦਾ bunga ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ. ਤੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਚਲ ਗਏ, ਉੱਥੇ ਰਹਿਣਾ, ਪਰ ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ they wouldn't just stay in the ਪੁਜਾਰੀ ਦਾ bunga. ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਹਰ ਵਕਤ ਵਿਰਾਗ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਚਿੱਤ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ. They had that asthan where they would go at night, or they had a place to stay. Even there ਬਹੁਤਾ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੇ. ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਗੀਨਾ ਘਾਟ ਹੈਗਾ ਜਾਂ ਗੋਦਾਵਰੀ ਦਾ ਕੰਢਾ ਸੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ. The sort of banks of the Godavari river.
There's like an asthan there, right? In their memory.
Now there is.
Anji.
Now there is. So that asthan where Baba Attar Singh Ji used to sit, there's a little hut made there now.
Anji.
That's just where Pujari Bunga used to be. Now Pujari Bunga has been knocked down. So it's not there anymore. But that hut where Baba Attar Singh Ji, so the Baba Attar Singh Ji never used to sit in that hut. That was made after.
Okay.
That just marks the spot where they used to sit.
Anji.
So Baba Attar Singh Ji, ਸਾਰੇ ਸੰਸਾਰੀ ਕੱਪੜੇ, ਫੌਜ ਦੇ ਕੱਪੜੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਾਏ ਸੀ, whatever they used to wear, ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਛ ਲਾਤਾ. And ਛੋਟਾ ਖੱਦਰ ਦਾ ਦਸਤਾਰ, ਕਸ਼ਹਿਰਾ ਤੇ ਪਰਨਾ, ਬਸ ਇਹੀ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਸੀ. Discarded all their worldly belongings. Day and night they'd sit in abhyas. And similar to when they were traveling, if prashada came, they'd have it. Otherwise, they would just remain in abhyas. Abhyas means doing Simran, the practice of Simran. And because they were sitting right in front of the Godavari is the river, which is right next to Hazur Sahib. Every single day, water goes from the Godavari to Takhat Sahib to do Ishnan of Maharaj's Takhat. Because when Maharaj stayed at Hazur Sahib, they would do Ishnan at Godavari. So, ਉਹ ਗੋਦਾਵਰੀ ਦੇ ਕੰਢੇ ਤੇ ਬਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਤੇ if prashada didn't come, they would just a book, so like a handful of water, just take it from the Godavari, drink that and carry on doing Simran.
Wow.
So ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਹਜ਼ੂਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ ਅਭਿਆਸ ਕੀਤਾ. The main, what they're known for, the main jap, ਉਹਦਾ we can't put an end to ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਮਾਈ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂ what is the details of their spiritual experience.
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਪਰ ਇੰਨਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ that according to their ਜੀਵਨਸ ਜੀਵਨੀਜ਼ their biographies, ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ ਖਾਸ ਅਭਿਆਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਤੇ ਭਾਈ ਹਜ਼ੂਰਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਗ੍ਰੰਥੀ, ਭਾਈ ਥੰਮਣ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਇਹ ਖਾਸ ਤਖਤ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਸੇਵਾਦਾਰ ਸੀਗੇ ਤੇ ਟੂ ਸੇਵਾ ਇਨ ਹਜ਼ੂਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰੇਮ ਪੈ ਗਿਆ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ। ਉਹ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਲਿਆ ਦਿੰਦੇ। Even that spot we talked about, and we'll put a photo up of it, even that spot, Baba Attar Singh Ji wouldn't always sit there. So sometimes they couldn't find Baba Attar Singh Ji. So they'd come with prasada, but they couldn't find him. So when they would find Baba Ji, they'd bring prasada. They Baba Attar Singh ne fir Japji Sahib de paath aramb kitte. We talked about this in Baba Ishar Singh Ji's life. We talked about Baba Gurmukh Singh Ji's life. Every Mahapurush, they did extensive ਅਭਿਆਸ of Japji Sahib. ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਪਾਠ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਕੀਤੇ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਟੋਨਸ ਰੱਖਣੇ, ਪੱਥਰ ਛੋਟੇ ਜਿਹੇ ਪੈਬਲਸ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ, ਅਤੇ ਉਹ ਰੱਖਣੇ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ। ਠੀਕ ਆ। ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਅਨਦਰ ਟੋਪਿਕ, ਲੋਟ ਆਫ ਪੀਪਲ ਸੇ ਕਿ ਪਾਠ ਦੇ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ, ਯੂ ਸ਼ੁਡਨਟ ਕਾਊਂਟ ਦ ਅਮਾਊਂਟ ਆਫ ਪਾਰਟਸ ਯੂ ਡੂ ਐਂਡ ਸੋ ਔਨ। ਹੁਣ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਕੀਤੇ, ਰਾਈਟ। What's the reason? The reason wasn't to like increase your hankar. We shouldn't go around telling people that I've done this many parts and so on. That is just an aim for you to get to. Anything in life, if you don't keep an aim, if you don't keep a target, most likely you won't even do that much. The people who say that sanu simran mala nahi rakhna chahida ja inna ginti nahi karna chahida. In fact, like I've tried this myself, so I'm saying from my own experience. When I don't have a mala, or if I don't have the counter or something, I'm less likely to do that part. I'm less likely to do any simran. That mala is just an aid. Right? It's just like a walking stick to help us. So Baba Attar Singh Ji, to get that abhyas done, to make sure that they were doing loads of abhyas, they would keep like a ginati, like a number that they wanted to complete every day. And to do that, they didn't have a mala, they had stones, they had pebbles. And they had that number of pebbles which they would collect every day from the banks of the Godavari. And then after they would do one part, they would throw it into the river. So pata lag gaya, ek part ho gaya. Dusra part, they throw the next pebble. They would only lift their head, so they keep their head down in full concentration of the Bani. They would only lift their head and pay attention to anyone around them. Even if someone brought prasada for them, they wouldn't lift their head until all the pebbles that they had gathered were finished. So when they had finished their target, fir they'd lift their head. Jive swer da ek target hunda si, sham da hunda si. So they had these targets. So they would do that much part. Then if a sevadar had come, and that sevadar, they had told them कि जे prasada ek prasada leona, one prasada, ਉਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਥੋੜਾ ਦਾਲ, ਤੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਪੱਥਰ ਤੇ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ, at that time, now Godavari, when we go to Hazur Sahib Yatra, they've made like pavements all along the Godavari, the river. They've made steps. At that time, imagine just stones and a natural bank, basically, bankside, riverside. ਉੱਥੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਪੱਥਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਰੱਖ ਦੇਣਾ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਨੂੰ ਛਕ ਲੈਣਾ, ਫਿਰ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਦੇਣਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਪਾਠ। If in this manner of doing Japji Sahibs at Nagina Ghat, 1 year and 7 months, they stayed there doing these Japji Sahib parts every single day. Do Ishnan, they baith jana on the riverside, फिर Japji Sahib part shuru kar dena. Sara din karna, all day. They just be immersed in Japji Sahib. They फिर रात nu, they would go into a small gufa. There's like a small stone cave. ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਣਾ ਤੇ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਸਾਰੀ ਰਾਤ ਕਰਨਾ। ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ they would go into the bunga of ਪੁਜਾਰੀ ਨਾਨੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, ਉੱਥੇ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰ ਲੈਣਾ। ਸੋ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਪਾਠ ਕੀਤੇ, there is also written they did ਬੇਅੰਤ ਜਾਪ of ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ, ਚਾਚਰੀ ਛੰਦ, ਤਵੈ ਪ੍ਰਸਾਦ, ਗੋਬਿੰਦੇ ਮੁਕੰਦੇ ਉਦਾਰੇ ਅਪਾਰੇ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਾਪ ਕੀਤੇ ਤੇ ਸੁਖਮਨੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜਾਪ ਕੀਤੇ। ਐਂਡ ਆਲਸੋ ਦ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਥੇਰ ਘਰ ਬੈਸੋ ਹਰ ਜਨ ਪਿਆਰੇ, ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਤੁਮਰੇ ਕਾਜ ਸਵਾਰੇ, ਇਹਦਾ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜਾਪ ਕੀਤਾ। ਸੋ ਕਦੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਚਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨੇ। They would just spend all their time doing simran. They wouldn't talk to anyone, do any idle talk. ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਆ ਕੇ ਬਚਨ ਵੀ ਕਰਦਾ ਨਾ, they just fold their hands. They just say, ਮੈਂ ਬਾਣੀ ਪੜਦਾ ਆ. Or they just raise one finger and the person will walk away. They realize ਕਿ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ, ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਅਭਿਆਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ. But at the same time, like we talked about, sukham home that can come, this very subtle form of ego. We start doing a lot of Gurbani part, or we start doing a lot of Simran, because we still have that mal, vikshep, avaran, all these different mal on our mind. This sukham home starts to come, this very light ego that we're better than others, we do more Simran than others, we have a higher avastha. Baba Attar Singh Ji had none of that. They had so much nimrata. If anyone came to them, or even when they were walking around Hazur Sahib, they'll fall at their charan and they start doing namaskar to them. And if you also get those people who start to recognize someone as a sadhu, on the other hand, you have those people who are nindaks as well. Some people might have started doing nindya in front of Baba Attar Singh Ji, ke sara din ithe baitha rehanda or something like that. Hor koi kaam nahi hega. Baba Attar Singh Ji would not say anything to them. He'd hear this, he'd just remain quiet. And if someone came in front of them, they would just bow to them. They'd bow to their charan. ਕਈ ਸਮੇਂ ਗੁਪਤ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਵੀ go to ਤਖਤ ਸਾਹਿਬ and do ਝਾੜੂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ. ਤੇ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜਲ ਲਿਆਉਣ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਸੋ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੇਵਾ ਸਿਮਰਨ. And their one aim was ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ. That was their aim. ਬਹੁਤ ਫਿਰ ਕਮਾਈ ਕੀਤੀ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ.
Just one question actually, because with the other Mahapurush, I know we don't get caught up in numbers, but they gave us kind of like, Baba Isha Singh Ji do like 5 Japji Sahibs, this amount of time. Like something like Guru Bachan Singh Ji do like 125,000 Japji Sahibs, Mumantar Jap on top of like Sri Harmandir Sahib, Darbar Sahib. Was there any examples of this? Because you just said it was just like, Japji Sahib,
so,
Lagatar.
Baba Attar Singh Ji, we know the amount they did.
Yeah.
In terms of the daily amount they did, I don't know that.
Okay.
The amount they did, we know that.
Okay.
So we'll get to that.
Okay then. Teaser.
At the end of the podcast.
And there's anything else with like the prashadda as well, like with the Jathedar who used to bring prashadda for them. I know there's a similar sakhi you told once about Sant Baba Mohan Singh Ji as well, which is quite similar, right?
So there's quite a few nice sakhiya about the time at Hazur Sahib.
Okay.
So this podcast, we're only really going to focus on this time at Hazur Sahib. Because Baba Attar Singh Ji Jeevan is so vast.
Anji. Which is exciting because that means a lot of parts, right?
Often we only focus on the time when they were Paragat, they were doing prachar.
Anji.
But at this moment, Baba Attar Singh, this is before they started any prachar. Hazur Sahib de vich, there's a few sakhiyan. Ek ta hega Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj ਆਪ Baba Attar Singh Ji ਦਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj themselves used to look for the welfare of Baba Attar Singh Ji. And we know that from the Sakhi. So, we're talking about Baba Attar Singh Ji sitting at Nagina Ghat. So everyone could see Baba Attar Singh Ji there. They knew he was there, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes Baba Attar Singh Ji would want to just stay in full seclusion from anyone. 3 miles from Nagina Ghat. If you've been to Hazur Sahib now, you know that all along where Langar Sahib Road is and where Nagina Ghat is, Shikar Ghat, all the different Guru Ghats, jithe hon Banda Ghat. So Nagina Ghat and Banda Ghat are quite near. Shikar Ghat is a bit further. So that area now is very populated. There's houses, there's buildings there, there's shops, all these different things. Usame, there was nothing. There's only them few asthans, and there's very less sangat that used to go there because of how hard it was to get to Hazur Sahib. Baba Attar Singh Ji, they went 3 miles from Nagina Ghat. At that time, there was no sort of abadi or no houses built alongside the river and so on. Utte bas forest ja siga. It's like a wilderness. And 3 miles from Nagina Ghat, there was no one basically. There's no people there. Baba Attar Singh Ji walked that far so no one could get to them basically. They didn't want anyone coming to them or anyone seeing them do Simran. They didn't want to be seen or they didn't want to show off that I'm doing this bhakti. They wanted to just be gupt. Baba Attar Singh Ji went into the river or Godavari de vich khad ke to Simran ja apna jara Japji Sahib da abhyas ja Gurmantar da abhyas, they just started doing it. They went into such a state of Simran or abhyas, 8 days they did not get out. It was samadhi de vich, meaning they were one with that sound of that Simran or that experience of that Simran. They just became one with it. And in that samadhi, in that avastha, 8 days passed. Kuch unhone shakya nahi. Hun ਸੁਖਮਨੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਨਾ, ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੀ ਕਰੈ ਪ੍ਰਤਪਾਲ। ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਆਪ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਬਾਬਾ ਕਰਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਸਾਖੀ, we know Maharaj themselves, when Baba Karam Singh Ji was immersed in Simran, Maharaj went and took his place in the parade.
ਹਾਂਜੀ।
ਇਵੇਂ ਹੀ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 8 ਦਿਨ ਬੀਤ ਗਿਆ। 8 days, imagine that, 8 days, that's longer than ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਘੰਟਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੰਘਦਾ, right? 2-3 ਘੰਟੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਅਸੀਂ ਛਕਦੇ ਆ। ਕਈਆਂ ਤਾਂ ਘੰਟਾ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ, right? That we need some food, or we need water, or we need something to sustain our body. They went to this avastha for 8 days, they didn't eat anything. ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੇਵਾਦਾਰ ਵੀ ਸੀ, they would come with prasada, but they couldn't find Baba Attar Singh Ji. They would just go back. ਇੱਕ ਰਾਤ, so one night, Bhai Nanu Singh Ji, the Jathedar of Sri Hazur Sahib, they've done their seva, they've come back to their bunga, and they're just about to go to sleep. ਤੇ ਮਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ, like so many days are passed and haven't had darshan. ਜਦੋਂ ਸੌ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਨਾ, ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਸੁਪਨਾ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। They have a dream. In that dream, a Gursikh, they can't tell who it is, but they can just see like a Gursikh is standing in the Godavari and they haven't eaten for many days. And a voice came to them. And ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸ਼ਰਧਾਵਾਨ Gursikh ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, they believe that was Guru Gobind Singh Ji. ਹਾਂਜੀ। And Maharaj says, my Gursikh hasn't eaten for 8 days. ਜਾ ਕੇ ਲੰਗਰ ਛਕਾ। ਇੱਥੇ ਹੁਣ ਬਾਬਾ ਭਾਈ ਨਾਨੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗ ਗਿਆ, they found out Baba Attar Singh Ji, it must be Baba Attar Singh Ji. And they're doing this Bhagti somewhere and we can't find them. But now Maharaj's hukam has come. So the next day, Bhai Nanu Singh Ji, they prepare the prasada and they go walking down the Godavari. They walk 2 miles. Remember, Baba Attar Singh Ji was at 3 miles. Imagine you're walking 2 miles and they're just wilderness. There's no sign of life. And he's just like, Baba Attar Singh is not here. And they gave up and they came back. That same night, they had another dream. Maharaj said the same bachan. And Pujari ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਸੀਗੇ ਭਾਈ ਨਾਨੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ, ਹਜ਼ੂਰ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਕੁਝ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਆ। I tried but I can't find them. ਫਿਰ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਗੋਦਾਵਰੀ ਦੇ ਕੰਢੇ ਹੋਰ ਅੱਗੇ ਜਾਓ, go further, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਮੇਰਾ ਪਿਆਰਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਨਾ, my beloved, you will see my beloved, meaning Bhai Attar Singh Ji, Baba Attar Singh Ji. So next day, following the bachan, the instruction of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Bhai Nanu Singh Ji with the prasada, they arrive and they keep going until they see Baba Attar Singh Ji. What did they see? Adol Dhyan vich magan, that's the words used. Adol Dhyan means that if we haven't eaten for 8 days, we'll be like falling around everywhere. Baba Attar Singh Ji, adol. That means they're just totally still and they're just immersed in Simran. When Baba Attar Singh Ji came out of the samadhi, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਭਾਈ ਨਾਨੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਕਿ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਵੀ ਲੰਗਰ ਫੋਈਏ। Baba Attar Singh Ji said, no, ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਛਕਣਾ। Because they were so, their poj and their ahar had become Simran. And when they were so satisfied with Simran, why did they need any other food? But Bhai Nanu Singh Ji explained ਕਿ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਛਕਦੇ, it's going to become difficult for me. Right? ਕਿ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ they're going to tell me off ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਹੁਕਮ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੇ ਪਿਆਰੇ ਨੂੰ, to my beloved, you're going to go and shaka langar, and again you've come back and you haven't shaka langar. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ heard this ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਆਪ ਹੁਕਮ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ, ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਲੰਗਰ ਛਕਿਆ। But they did a bachan as well that you're not to tell anyone about this. ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਗੱਲ ਹੈਗਾ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਪਤ ਰੱਖਣਾ ਹੈ। It's only after that Bhai Nanu Singh Ji told Gursikhs this, when Baba Attar Singh Ji returned to Panjab. Because Baba Attar Singh Ji didn't want that Bhai Nanu Singh Ji goes to Hazur Sahib, tells the Sangat, and the Sangat starts coming and doing puja of them. He didn't want that. So they kept this gupt. So that's one example. And someone might say, okay, was that only in Baba Attar Singh Ji's life? No. There's another Sakhi, which is like, it's like a mirror of this Sakhi in Sant Mohan Singh Ji's life. Sant Mohan Singh Ji, who is a great Brahm Gyani who only passed away recently. 2020, December, they passed away. Baba Mohan Singh Ji was instructed by Sant Guru Gobind Singh Ji to go to Hazur Sahib and do Bhagti, Gupt hoke. The instructions of Sant Guru Gobind Singh Ji to Sant Mohan Singh Ji was is that no one is to know that you are Giani. किस ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੌਣ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਗੁਪਤ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਮੋਹਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਉਹ ਜੋੜਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਲੰਗਰ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਬਰਤਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ 1.25 ਲੱਖ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਪਾਠ they spent time doing that in the same way at that time there was Baba Harnam Singh Ji who was the Jathedar and the backstory of this how did this story come about it's quite interesting is that ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਹਰਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਨਾ they used to do ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ but for some reason they had to leave Hazur Sahib and ਵਿਰਾਗ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ they always remain in this state that seva that I used to do I can't do that seva anymore and this is like a common theme that we read that those because they're so close to Maharaj's seva they'd often have darshan now we hear about many of the jathedars of Hazur Sahib that would have direct contact with Guru Gobind Singh Ji
ਹਾਂਜੀ
and Baba Harnam Singh Ji, they had a dream once, one night, and ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj gave darshan, and they said to him that just like Hazur Sahib is my taqat, Anandpur Sahib is also my taqat. Go to Anandpur Sahib and do seva. Baba Harnam Singh Ji goes to Anandpur Sahib, and he finds a very nice piece of land, and he buys the land, and his itcha is itte ek vidyala bane, that Gursikhs, young children, they come and they learn katha, kirtan, santhia. Then in his mind it came that who is there now who can teach the vidya without any knowledge, you know? And then the only person he could think of was Sant Mohan Singh Ji. So he goes to Pindar Kala, Gurdwara Khanparka Sahib, and he goes to Mahapurush, and he says to Sant Mohan Singh Ji, I've got this jagah and I want to just give this jagah to you. Tusi ithe asthan banao and teach Singhs there. Or give duty to other Singhs to teach there. But tusi sambhalo. Baba Sant Mohan Singh Ji said that this asthan where I'm at now, because of the hukam of Mahapurush, right? I have to look after this, but I don't want this asthan. ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਦੱਸ the ਤਿਆਗ that Sant Mohan Singh Ji had ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਅਸਥਾਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਪਰ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੇ ਹੁਕਮ ਲਾਇਆ I've got to do ਸੇਵਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਅਸਥਾਨ ਕਿਉਂ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ I don't want it and the funny thing is that asthan was so sought after because that piece of land, even to this day, there's a Vidyala there now. Even to this day, it's like it's a very expensive piece of land because right next to the railway station is right next to Takhat Sahib. So, like idada jaga, if you go now and say I want to buy a plot of land right next to Takhat Sahib, and then it's also transport right next to it. It's very hard to find places like that. And all the other sadhu sants or other people, other organizations, they wanted that land. And they were all coming to Baba Harnam Singh Ji and they're saying ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੇ ਦਿਓ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੇ ਦਿਓ Baba Harnam Singh Ji was adamant ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਹੋਰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਣਾ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੇ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ Baba ji when so many other people are coming why don't you just give it to them but Sant Mohan Singh doesn't even want it and he goes I wasn't going to tell you this but there's a reason why then he explains when Sant Mohan Singh Ji was doing Bhagti in the same way that Baba Attar Singh Ji did Bhagti and Sant Mohan Singh Ji this is someone who only passed away like few years ago, right? 2020. The same incident happens that they're doing Bhagti on the side of Godavari and for 7 to 8 days they go into Samadhi. Jive Baba Attar Singh Ji 8 din vaste 7 to 8 din Sant Mohan Singh Ji doing Simran they go into this state where they're just immersed in Simran and ਉਹਨੇ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਛਕਿਆ ਤੇ ਭਾਈ ਹਰਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ who is the Jathedar they're about to sleep ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਆਈ and they can ਉਹ ਹੈਡ ਪੁਜਾਰੀ ਆ ਉੱਠ ਜਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਦੇ ਰੂਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਸਟਰਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਮੇਰਾ ਸਿੰਘ 8 ਦਿਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ 7-8 ਦਿਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਉਹਨੇ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਛਕਿਆ ਤਾਂ my ਸਿੰਘ is sitting doing Simran for 7 to 8 days and he hasn't eaten anything ਤੇ ਤੂੰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਅਲੰਗਰ ਛਕਾ ਤੇ Maharaj even told the exact location to him. Go to this asthan, he's sitting there. ਤੇ ਭਾਈ ਹਰਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ it was maybe 9 or 10 p.m. ਜਦੋਂ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ Baba Mohan Singh Ji they opened their eyes. When they saw that Bhai Harnam Singh Ji sitting in front of them, they started to laugh. ਇਹ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਆ ਗਿਆ? Where has he come from? There was no one there. It's similar even because ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਬਣਿਆ ਹੈ it's only recently.
Hanji.
Even 50 years ago, there was a lot of secluded areas. Even now there is at Hazur Sahib, a lot of secluded areas. ਤੇ Baba Harnam Singh Ji said ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਭੇਜਿਆ ਕਿ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਸ਼ੱਕ ਨਾ ਕਰੋ. That's why he said, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਇੰਨੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਹੈ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੀ, why would I want to give that astan to anyone else? That's why they were so adamant. That just shows that ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਭਗਤੀ ਕਰਦਾ ਆ, ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਕਰੇ ਪ੍ਰਤਪਾਲ. ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਆਪ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਫਿਰ ਪ੍ਰਤਪਾਲ ਨਾ. They look after their Guru Sikhs themselves. ਤੇ that's one story. The second story is a bachan that Baba Attar Singh Ji did to Sant Attar Singh Ji. They said that in bandagi, when we do bhakti, there's two things that are an obstacle.
Hanji.
They said damadi te chamadi. ਕਹਿੰਦੇ damadi te chamadi ਭਗਤੀ ਦੀ ਸਫਲਤਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਘਨ ਆ. ਵਿਘਨ we say obstacles.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
ਇਹ ਦੋ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਆ. damadi ਕਿਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ? damadi ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੈਸਾ.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
Money, right? Maya. And the second thing is chamadi. Chamadi means skin. That means beauty. So calm and money, they often become the obstacles in us succeeding in bhakti. What happened is that when Sant Attar Singh Ji was traveling to Hazur Sahib, on the way there was some Gursikh. They saw Baba Ji, and when they saw he's traveling to Hazur Sahib, thode maya kapda ch pa ke na santan nu deta. And they said, if you need this maya, if you need anything on the way, ਇਹ ਮਾਇਆ ਨੂੰ ਵਰਤ ਲਓ. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਸੰਤਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੱਪੜਾ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਲੱਕ ਨਾਲ ਬੰਨ੍ਹਤਾ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਤੇ ਕਮਰ ਕਸਾ ਕਰਤਾ. When they reached Hazur Sahib at the bunga of Bhai Nanu Singh Ji, they dug a hole in front of some bushes and they dug it there. ਉੱਥੇ ਦਬਾਤਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ. ਹੁਣ what happened is when Sant Giani Attar Singh Ji started doing the abhyas, ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ ਪਾਠ ਸਿਮਰਨ, their mind used to go to the toa. The toa means the hole where they had dug the money. Every time they started in the Simran, their mind would go there. ਤੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਨਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਨਾ, always goes to, it's like that's the story of the person in Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj Jivan, the mullah, I think, the qazi, who's doing his namaz, but his mind is at home. But I think, was it the calf or something?
Yeah, his trade, he was doing something.
ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਹਨੇ ਡਿੱਗ ਜਾਣਾ ਸੀ ਵਿੱਚ. The newborn calf was going to
fall in the hole.
Fall into a hole or something. Obviously, whenever Baba Attar Singh used to sit, that's how strong Maya is. Maya has such an effect that always his mind used to go to that toa. ਫਿਰ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਉਹਨੇ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ, ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ ਨੇ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ, ਉਹਨੇ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਵਿਘਨ ਆ, ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਇਹ ਮਾਇਆ, ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਤੇ ਉੱਠ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ ਨੇ ਇਹੀ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਸੀ ਕਿਤੇ ਕੰਮ ਆ ਜੂਗੀ. ਵੀ ਥਿੰਕ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਆ ਜੂਗੀ. ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਸੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਉੱਠ ਕੇ ਤੇ they dug the hole. ਤੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਅੱਜ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੇਮਣ ਦੀ ਜੜ ਵੱਢ ਹੀ ਦੇਣਾ ਆ. ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪ੍ਰੇਮਣ ਆ, this ਮਾਇਆ, ਇਹਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜੜ ਆ, ਇਹਦਾ ਰੂਟ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੱਢ ਦੇਣਾ ਆ. ਅਟੈਚਮੈਂਟ ਟੂ ਮਾਇਆ, we're going to get rid of it. ਤੇ ਉਸੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਉਹ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਸੀਗਾ ਨਾ, ਉਹ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਟੋਆ ਪੁੱਟਤਾ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਗੋਦਾਵਰੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਟਤਾ. ਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕਦੀ ਫੁਰਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਇਆ ਮਾਇਆ ਬਾਰੇ. ਇੰਨਾ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ in the whole ਜੀਵਨ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਨਿਰਲੇਪ for ਮਾਇਆ. ਕਦੀ ਵੀ ਮਾਇਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਾਇਆ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੋਈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਲੈਣਾ ਦੇਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ. ਤੇ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਨਿਰਲੇਪ, fully unattached, no desire for any sort of maya or money. So that's what Baba Attar Singh used to say, that maya, meaning the desire for money, it's not wrong to earn money, dharam di kirt karni, but the desire, that trishna for loads and loads of maya, that's what is an obstacle in our bhakti. Someone who's satisfied with the amount of maya that Maharaj is blessing them with, they'll do bhakti. The person who is just focused on gaining loads and loads of maya, they're not going to do bhakti. And then the second thing, the biggest obstacle is calm. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਾਮ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਸਰੀਰਕ ਸੁੰਦਰਤਾ, ਚਮੜੀ, skin, that becomes an obstacle. So when Baba Attar Singh Ji used to do this upadesh, they used to tell this ਸਾਖੀ. ਤੇ ਉਹੀ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਐਂਡ ਉਹ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਇੱਕ ਕਸ਼ਹਿਰਾ ਸੀ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਦਾ, ਹਨਾ, ਇਸ਼ਨਾਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਧੁੱਪ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਸੁੱਕ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ. ਇੱਕ ਪਰਨਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਤੇ ਸਰੀਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਚਾਦਰ ਜਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਬਸ. That's the simplicity that they, other than the ਪੰਜ ਕਕਾਰ and that chadar, that dastar, they are nothing. They let go of all attachment to anything.
And just living in the jungles as well, then they must have encountered not just people but animals as well, right? By living there.
ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਘਾਟ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ where Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj blessed Madhav Das Vairagi, made him Banda Bahadur. ਉਹ ਸਥਾਨ ਤੇ about 100 steps there's a place called Gautam Ghat. It's all Ghat. The reason all these sthans are called Ghat means the riverside. So on the banks on the river, there's another place called Gautam Ghat. The Gautam Ghat is a place where ਬਹੁਤ ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਸਮਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੋਕ ਉੱਥੇ ਭਗਤੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. And it's very quiet there. ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਗੌਤਮ ਘਾਟ. ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਭਗਤੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ. ਤੇ ਭਗਤੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਕੋਈ ਸਿੰਘ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਾਦਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ. When they reached there, what did they see? Massive snake with the hood fully open. ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ it just fixated on Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji's face. ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਆ. ਤੇ ਉਸ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਡਰ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਇਹਨੇ ਡੰਗ ਮਾਰਨਾ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਨੂੰ. He's gonna bite Baba Attar Singh Ji. And ਉਹ ਥੋੜਾ shocked ਹੋ ਗਿਆ. And when he got shocked, Baba Attar Singh Ji heard the hiljol, the movement, and ਉਹ ਸਮਾਧੀ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਆ ਗਏ ਬਾਹਰ. When they saw the snake, they said to the snake, ਡਰ ਨਾ, ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ. ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਅੱਖਾਂ ਖੋਲੀਆਂ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੱਪ ਸੀਗਾ ਨਾ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਇੱਕ ਨਮਸਕਾਰ ਕਰਕੇ ਚੱਲ ਗਿਆ. ਤੇ ਸੰਤਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਕੀ ਕਿਹਾ? What did Baba Attar Singh Ji said? Baba Attar Singh Ji said to the Singh, ਤੂੰ ਫਿਕਰ ਨਾ ਕਰ, ਪ੍ਰੇਮੀ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਦੇਣ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ. ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੇਰਾ ਪ੍ਰੇਮੀ ਹੈ, meaning Guru Gobind Singh Ji, ਉਹ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ, ਉਹ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ, they've come to give me darshan in the form of the animal, form of the snake. So that just comes to seeing Vaheguru and everything. That's the avastha that they got to. Like we read in Sukhmani Sahib, Ur ਧਾਰ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਅੰਤਰ ਨਾਮ, ਸਰਬ ਮੈਂ ਪੇਖੈ ਭਗਵਾਨ, ਨਿਮਖ ਨਿਮਖ ਠਾਕੁਰ ਨਮਸਕਾਰ ਹੈ, ਨਾਨਕ ਉਹ ਪਰਸ ਸਗਲ ਨਿਸਤਾਰ ਹੈ. And we see that in the lives. You know when we say sab mein hai jyot, jyot hai soye, not only in the humans, not only in people they saw that, even in the animals they saw Vaheguru. ਘਟ ਘਟ ਮੈਂ ਹਰਜੂ ਬਸ ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਸਰਬ ਮੈਂ ਪੇਖੈ ਭਗਵਾਨ. ਸਰਬ means everything. The ਪੱਤੇ, ਆਕਾਸ਼, ਜਲੇ ਹਰੀ, ਥਲੇ ਹਰੀ, ਉਰੇ ਹਰੀ, ਬਨੇ ਹਰੀ, ਸਾਰੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਸਭ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਹੈ, ਸਭ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਹੈ, ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਮੇਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੋਈ. ਇਵੇਂ ਉਰ ਧਾਰ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਅੰਤਰ ਨਾਮ. That person who enshrines Vaheguru's name in their heart, sarb mein pekhe bhagwan, they see Vaheguru in everyone then. So that's what Baba Attar Singh Ji said. Okay, Vaheguru is in everything. Vaheguru was in that snake. Vaheguru came to give me darshan. Why are you scared? So that's the avastha they had reached.
So you're saying that they saw Guru Sahib Ji or Vaheguru Ji within the animals, but did they actually see Guru Sahib Ji themselves then? Like you hear about many Mahapurush having darshan of Guru Sahib Ji.
Baba Attar Singh Ji had that ichha. They wanted to have pratak darshan of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. After some time, first they were at Nagina Ghat, which is quite near to Hazur Sahib. Then they went to Shikar Ghat. Shikar Ghat is that asthan where Mula Khatri, in the time of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, Sakhi tusi aap, you can look it up. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੂਲਾ ਖੱਤਰੀ ਸੀਗਾ, ਉਹਦਾ ਉਦਾਰ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ when he hid from Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, ਉਹਦਾ ਸੱਪ ਨੇ ਡੰਗ ਮਾਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ. And he passes away. But then because he had done Sangat of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, Maharaj did bachan, in my 10th form I will do udar. And then Mula Khatri was in the form of a rabbit, Khargosh. And Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਿਕਾਰ ਕੀਤਾ. ਤੇ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਹੈਰਾਨ ਹੋ ਗਏ. ਇਹ ਛੋਟਾ ਖਰਗੋਸ਼ ਦਾ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਕਿਉਂ ਤੀਰ ਮਾਰਿਆ? Usually bigger animals will do ਸ਼ਿਕਾਰ, but ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਛੋਟਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਖਰਗੋਸ਼ ਦਾ ਕੀਤਾ. And they had a shanka, and Maharaj explained ਕਿ ਇਹ ਮੂਲਾ ਖੱਤਰੀ ਆ. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਮੂਲਾ ਖੱਤਰੀ even gave darshan to the Gursikhs, and they explained that why I'm in this situation. So that ਅਸਥਾਨ ਕੋਲ ਸ਼ਿਕਾਰ ਘਾਟ. ਤੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦਾ ਪਵਿੱਤਰ ਸਥਾਨ ਆ, ਉੱਥੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਚਲ ਗਏ. And ਉੱਥੇ ਫੋਰੈਸਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. So ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਗੀਨਾ ਘਾਟ, ਬੰਦਾ ਘਾਟ, that's still nearer to Hazur Sahib. At that time, Shikar Ghat, and there's pictures as well of Shikar Ghat at that time. It's just like a small hut. So don't imagine the Shikar Ghat of now, which is really nice and made out of marble, and it's got a massive sarovar. It's got a lot of shops around or anything like that. It's got a road next to it. Nahin. Also, Shikar Ghat was a tiny little hut on the top of a hill, and there's a forest around it. Baba Attar Singh Ji went to Shikar Ghat Sahib. ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ they started doing the Japji Sahibs there. So the thing with Baba Attar, when Sangat started to realize the avastha of Baba Ji, or Sangat started to come darshan of Baba Ji at Nagina Ghat, they didn't like it. So they realized, I need to go somewhere else. That's when they went to Shikar Ghat. And the question you asked about how much abhyas did Baba Attar Singh Ji do, At Nagina Ghat, next to Hazur Sahib, they did 1 lakh Japji Sahib. So 100,000 Japji Sahibs. And then at Shikar Ghat, they did 25,000 Japji Sahibs. So ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਰ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸਾਰੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਅਭਿਆਸ ਕੀਤੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਤੇ ਥੋੜੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਫਿਰ ਸ਼ਿਕਾਰ ਘਾਟ ਸੇਵਾ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਫਿਰ they came back to Nagina Ghat. 2 years pass and still they haven't got that darshan that they desired or the pratak darshan of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. ਵੈਸੇ ਵੀ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਨਾ ਵਿਰਾਗ ਆ ਗਿਆ they even got to this point that what is the point of keeping this body. ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਰੀਰ ਆ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਿਆਗ ਦਈਏ. They even got to that level. And when they were about to ਤਿਆਗ their body, ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਜੀਵਨੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਆ ਕਿ they went to the Godavari and they thought, let me just submerge into the water of Godavari. And what happened is, as they're going in, some sort of force chucked them out and they landed back on the riverbank. ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਇੱਕ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਆਈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਆਕਾਸ਼ ਬਾਣੀ what we call, like a voice came to them and that voice is saying ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖਾ ਸਾਵਧਾਨ ਹੋ, ਤਿਆਰ ਬਰ ਤਿਆਰ ਹੋ ਜਾ. ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਤੂੰ ਕੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ, what do you want. ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੰਤ ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਸ਼ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ, ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਆਵਾਂ ਪ੍ਰਤੱਖ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ. ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਜੀਵਨੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੰਤ ਤੇਜਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਲਿਖਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਭਾਈ ਤੂੰ ਸਾਵਧਾਨ ਹੋ ਜਾ, ਤੇਰਾ ਹਜੇ ਸਮਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ. ਇਟਸ ਨਾਟ ਯੋਰ ਟਾਈਮ ਟੂ ਲੀਵ ਯੋਰ ਬੋਡੀ ਹੈ. ਕਿ ਤੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇਸ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਵਾਹ ਚਲਾਉਣਾ ਹੈ. You're gonna the word we used before, the pravah, like the wave of Amrit. You're gonna do Amrit Sanchars all around Punjab. And ਸਾਰੇ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਦਾ ਚੱਕਰ ਫਿਰਾਉਣਾ ਹੈ. So the whole world ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੂੰ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਦਾ ਚੱਕਰ ਫਿਰਾਉਣਾ. And someone can do ਸ਼ੰਕਾ ਹੈ that Baba Attar Singh Ji never came outside of India. Right? They never left India. They never went to any other country. But ਦੇਖੋ, Baba Attar Singh Ji was the one who gave bachan to Baba Teja Singh Ji. Baba Teja Singh Ji, ਉਹ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਸੀਗੇ who with Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji's agya, they left for England in August 1906. They studied at UCL and they studied at Cambridge. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ Columbia and Harvard, ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ America, ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਗਏ. ਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਉੱਤੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਵੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, when you open it, it says Sant Teja Singh double MA. They did 2 masters. ਸਿਰਫ ਇੱਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ, 2 ਕੀਤੇ. ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ they didn't just go to get education, wherever they went they did ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ. And ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜੀਵਨ that deserves its own podcast. Right? So in England, the first Guru Ghar, which we now say Shepherd's Bush Gurdwara, was called Khalsa Jatha Guru Ghar. That was founded by Sant Baba Teja Singh Ji. In California, the first Gurdwara in Stockton. So in 1910, the first Guru Ghar in England, Baba Teja Singh Ji creates that Guru Ghar. Stockton, California, 1912, first Guru Ghar, Baba Teja Singh Ji creates it. Victoria, British Columbia, 1913, first Guru Ghar, Baba Teja Singh Ji creates it. So Baba Teja Singh Ji didn't only create the Guru Ghar, they did Amrit Sanchar, they did Prachar. So while they're doing the education and they're receiving such high levels of education, worldly education, they're also joining people to Sikhi. So ਸਾਰੇ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਾਬਾ ਤੇਜਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ ਕੀਤਾ. ਉਹ ਵੀ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੀ blessings ਨਾਲ ਸੀਗਾ. It was the blessings of Baba Attar Singh Ji. So those are the bachans of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj. When Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj said that, what do you want? What is your itcha? Because Maharaj is happy with Baba Attar Singh Ji's kamai, with their seva, their simran. ਤੇ ਸੰਤ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆ. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ the voice said, what type of darshan? Sant Ji said, give me darshan, I want to see your darbar. ਕਿ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਆਪਣੇ ਤਖਤ ਤੇ ਬਿਰਾਜਮਾਨ, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, I want to see you sitting on your takhat. How it must have been when you were sitting on your takhat, in your darbar. I want to see that. ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ 12 ਵਜੇ, so 12 a.m, midnight, Nagina Ghat ਆ ਜਾ. So imagine that Vairag now that Sant Ji has, that longing that Baba Attar Singh Ji has to have darshan of Guru Gobind Singh. They have to wait. They couldn't wait for that moment. They were so excited because Maharaj ne darshan dene hai. Te fir jado midnight aa gaya, they arrive at Nagina Ghat, and imagine this sort of scene that on the banks of the river, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj's darbar, he can see it. And Maharaj is sitting on their takhat, Tyar bar Tyar, in Bir Asan. Maharaj has got their shastar on, their kalgi is shining in the moonlight. And Maharaj apne takhat te are, behind them Gursikh is doing Chaur Sahib, Paredar are standing, and all around them Gursikhs are sitting, Shaheed Singhs. All the Pratan Singhs, Panj Piare, all the Surme, the Shaheed Singhs are all sitting there. The Kavis are sitting there, the Bhavanja Kavis. All the Vidwans are sitting there. Gursikhs, Ragis and Rababis are doing Kirtan. So that Pratak Darshan of Maharaj Darbar, Baba Attar Singh Ji is having it. In Panj Suche Moti, which is written by Dr. Tara Singh, so that book which is there, Ode which he writes, so Sant Teja Singh, because I have a feeling that Baba Attar Singh Ji gave bachan to Baba Teja Singh that you're not to write about this incident. That's why he hasn't written it there. But he does refer to it in other parts of the book. So it's not like he's saying this incident didn't happen. Sant Teja Singh, later on in the book, there's a question where someone asks Sant Attar Singh Ji, what was that darshan like at Nagina Ghat?
Okay.
So it's mentioned in there, but in this specific chapter about Hazur Sahib is not written. And possibly Baba Attar Singh Ji didn't want it to be written. But this other book, Pan Suche Moti, they talk about it in that book, that the writer of that book was there when someone asked a question to Sant Attar Singh Ji about this incident, and they told this incident. So what happened when Maharaj went in, when Sant Attar Singh Ji walked into that darbar, Sant Attar Singh Ji didn't used to say it openly. Some Gursikhs said that it's at that time that Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj said, they gave the hukam, now you're going to do prachar. You've done all this Simran, now it's your time to do prachar. So Baki, what that interaction was with Guru Gobind Singh Ji and Sant Attar Singh Ji, wahi janade. They wouldn't openly talk about it. So that's written in Panj Suche Moti. उस समय गुरु गोबिंद सिंह महाराज ने हुक्म कीता सी जाके प्रचार करना. Now is your time कि हुण तू प्रचार करना. ये संत अत्तर सिंह जी ने उस समय महाराज दे दर्शन प्रतक्ष होए. And just linking this to other times where they talked about Maharaj's darshan. One time there was Ragi Hira Singh Ji. ਜਿਹੜੇ Ragi Hira Singh Ji ਸੀਗੇ, they were very close to Bhai Veer Singh Ji. And at one point, Ragi Hira Singh Ji, who is known as an exemplary Kirtani, ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜੀਵਨੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੁੰਦਰ ਆ. ਤੇ Ragi Hira Singh Ji stayed some time in the Jatha of Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. So when they were younger, they stayed with Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ later on in Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji's life, they went to Hazur Sahib di Yatra. So this is not the first time they went, where they did Bhagti. This is much later on, when they were much older. And they had already done a lot of prachar at this time. Everyone knew who Baba Attar Singh Ji was at this time. With the whole Jatha of Sangat, they went to Hazur Sahib. Sant Ji is sitting on the banks of Godavari with the Sangat, very similar to how they used to sit Pella, but now they got loads of Sangat with them. The Bhai Hira Singh Ji Ragi, they did beinti to Baba Attar Singh Ji. Again, it's alluding to the fact that at this same spot, you had darshan of Maharaj. And he said, Sanu vi ho sakde darshan. You got darshan. Can you do kirpa ask Maharaj to give us darshan as well?
Anji.
Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਚਨ ਕੀਤੇ ਕਿ ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਤਾਂ ਹਰ ਵਕਤ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਦੇ ਅੰਗ ਸੰਗ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ. Maharaj is always with you. ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਸਿਰਫ ਸਾਡੇ ਧਿਆਨ ਤੇ ਅਡੋਲ ਨਿਸ਼ਚੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਫਰਕ ਆ. Baba Attar Singh Ji said, our dhyan is not there and our nishcha, our faith isn't there. If we have that faith and that dhyan, if we do Simran, we do Kamai, and we have nishcha in Maharaj, of course, Maharaj is always with you. Guru mere sang sada hai naale. Why won't Maharaj give you darshan? Baba Attar Singh Ji said, jad hirde da takhat saaf hove. Imagine you're inviting Maharaj to come and meet you, then you need to make a takhat for them to sit on. And the takhat is our hirda, our heart. When our hirda roopi takhat isn't saaf, then Maharaj isn't going to come. ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਹਿਰਦੇ ਰੂਪ ਤੱਕ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕਰੋ. ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਉਸੇ ਵੇਲੇ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਆ ਕੇ ਬਿਰਾਜਮਾਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ. ਤੇ ਹਿਰਦਾ ਰੂਪ ਤਖਤ, that ਤਖਤ of the heart, our antashkaran, when it's clean, then Maharaj automatically comes and resides in the hirda of the Gursikh. ਵਸ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਉੱਥੇ ਬੈਠ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ. ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, as soon as they said that, ਆਪ ਨਾਮ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੁਟ ਗਏ. And we hear this about a lot of Mahapurush, that when they do certain bachan, they would just go into Samadhi.
Mm-hmm.
And then when all the Sangat saw that Baba Attar Singh Ji is in Samadhi, Baba Hira Singh Ji said, chalo, Mahapurush ta hun Samadhi chal gaya, I'm going to go. Shayad Takhat Sahib te jana si, or had Kirtan duty or something. He just left. ਤੇ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਘੜੀ ਬੀਤਿਆ ਸੀ. So not a lot of time. Bhai Hira Singh is gone. And the Sangat sitting in front of the Godavari, in front of the river, like a lightning flash happened. In that lightning flash, in that Lishkara means just like a split second of lightning, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj on their Neela Koda, they're sitting on their Koda, and around them are the Panj Piare. And all the Sangat sitting there had Darshan. At that time. ਤੇ ਉਸੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਇੱਕ ਸਕਿੰਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਏ, is like a blink of the eye, that's what's written here, ਕਿ ਅੱਖ ਦੇ ਫੋਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਥੇ ਪਾਸੋਂ ਲੰਘ ਗਏ. So all the Sangat sitting there, like a blink of the eye, Maharaj gave him darshan and went. ਤੇ ਸਾਰੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਆਨੰਦ ਚ ਹੋ ਗਈ. Bhai Hira Singh Ji came back. All the Sangat started to tell him, okay, Maharaj gave darshan. And then ਬਹੁਤ ਪਛਤਾਏ. He had that chance but I left. So ਕੀ ਪਤਾ ਅੱਗੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ we hear about Bhai Hira Singh Ji, a lot of ਕਮਾਈ ਲਈ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਹੋਣੇ ਆ, but at that time there's that ਸਾਖੀ.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਭਾਈ ਸੁੱਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਸੀ. ਭਾਈ ਸੁੱਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ used to be with Bhai Hira Singh, they were older. ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਸੀ, and they were doing ਮੁੱਠੀ ਛਾਪੀ means ਕਿ ਲੱਤਾਂ ਘੁੱਟਣੀਆਂ. ਹਾਂਜੀ. ਉਹ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਬੈਠੇ ਸੀਗੇ, they were doing that ਸੇਵਾ. ਤੇ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ they did benti to Baba Attar Singh Ji. This is what I was talking about. What, you know, when you're doing someone's seva, then you can ask them questions close up. Yeah. And they said ke je khechal na hove benti kara. And look at the nimrata of Baba Attar Singh Ji. Bhai Hira Singh Ji says that if it's not too much trouble, can I ask a question? And Sant Attar Singh Ji has so much respect that this was someone much younger than them, but they said, you're the kirtani of the Guru. Okay, whatever you want to ask, tu puch. ਤੇ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਭਾਈ ਸੁੱਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, they say ਕਿ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਮੈਂ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਕਿ ਹਜ਼ੂਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨਗੀਨਾ ਕਾਟਿਆ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So coming back to that ਸਾਖੀ, they said, ਉਹ ਦੱਸੋ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ? How was it? And when Sant Attar Singh Ji heard the words that you had darshan of Guru Gobind Singh, they were lying on the manja, straight away they got up, ਉੱਠ ਗਏ, ਸਾਵਧਾਨ ਹੋ ਗਏ. And they started to laugh and they said, ਭਾਈ ਸੁੱਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਦੱਸੀਏ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਸੀ? I cannot describe that darshan. ਪਰ ਭਾਈ ਕਲਗੀਆਂ ਵਾਲੇ ਦੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ, right? And at that time, with a lot of love, Sant Attar Singh Ji ਆਪਣੇ ਹੱਥ ਭਾਈ ਸੁੱਧ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਦਾੜੇ ਤੇ ਫੇਰਿਆ. So with their hands, they stroked the beard of Bhai Sudh Singh Ji, and they said, ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੇਰਾ ਰੂਪ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਆ. And then at that time they started to sing the shabad from Sri Sarabalo Granth, ਖਾਲਸਾ ਮੇਰੋ ਰੂਪ ਹੈ ਖਾਸ, ਖਾਲਸਾ ਮਹਿ ਹੋ ਕਰੋ ਨਿਵਾਸ, ਖਾਲਸਾ ਮੇਰੋ ਮੁਖ ਹੈ ਅੰਗਾ. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਉਹੀ ਮੇਰਾ ਮੁਖ ਹੈ, ਖਾਲਸਾ ਹੀ ਮੇਰਾ ਅੰਗ ਹੈ. ਖਾਲਸਾ ਕੇ ਹੋ ਸਦ ਸਦ ਸੰਗਾ, ਖਾਲਸੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਸਦਾ ਅੰਗ ਸੰਗਿਆ. ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਬਾਬਾ ਅਤਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ. ਤੇ ਭਾਈ ਸੁੱਧ ਸਿੰਘ says that ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਮੇਰੀ ਕੀ ਅਵਸਥਾ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਉਹ ਮੈਂ ਦੱਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦਾ. ਕਿ hearing these words, it was like ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ. But look at that Sharda that Baba Attar Singh Ji had for the Gursikhs. They said that just from you I'm having darshan of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. In every single Khalsa, I have darshan of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj. So these are just some Sakya from Hazur Sahib. Ito baad, when Baba Attar Singh Ji got this hukam from Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, that you're going to go and do Prachar, फिर they leave Hazur Sahib. Maharaj they agya leke. They didn't want to leave, but they had that hukam. And then later on in the next podcast, we can look later on. Baba Attar Singh Ji goes to Rishikesh. They go to Hardwar. They spend time there doing abhyas. फिर they officially leave the Fauj. They cut their name from the army list. They फिर Kashmir भी जाते हैं. And then there's amazing sakhis about a pind called Kanoha. Uthe reh ke Baba Attar Singh Ji kalle, they did many akhand parts just by themselves in one sitting. and uto baad kai pind, and then what were the qualities of Baba Attar Singh Ji, how did they do prachar, many other stories, for example, in detail, where with a lot of nidarta, Baba Attar Singh Ji did prachar, and they joined people to Gurbani, to Guru Sahib. One of the kede bachan sige, we'll go through that later on.
Anji. Well, thank you so much for covering the life of Sant Attar Singh Ji. And like you said, there's so much more that we can cover going forward. Is there anything that you'd like to finish off with, like a finishing Sakhi or like a Sikhi or anything, Ji?
So there's one Mahapurush who the whole Panth knows, Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji, Kalera wale. We all know about Nanak sir. Baba Attar Singh Ji de jeevan vich there's a very nice anecdote. Ek vari Sant Singh Ji hunde si from Amrit Sahib. They told the Sakhi that they went to Jagrao and in Ludhiana, where Nanak sir is, and they had Darshan of Baba Attar Singh Ji. And with them, they took 500 Gursikhs to do Darshan of Mahapurush. Those who have been Nanak sir, they know about the Pura Sahib. There's an underground chamber where Baba Attar Singh Ji used to sit and do Simran. And Baba Ji ode vich hunde si, and only those who had Agya could go inside. The rest of the Sangat would have Darshan of Baba Attar Singh Ji when they used to come out of the Pura Sahib to have Darshan of Maharaj. And then Baba Attar Singh Ji to sit in a hole, a toa lower than the Sangat. And that's when the Sangat used to have Darshan of Baba Attar Singh Ji. So not everyone had the chance to speak to Baba Attar Singh Ji. But this Santhia Singh Ji, because they Mahapurush, they were very high Avastha Gursikh, they were called in to the Pura Sahib.
Anji.
And when they went to Baba Attar Singh Ji and they started doing bhajan with them, Baba Attar Singh Ji done this bhajan. And this, just to give you the source of this bhajan, is written in Sant Gatha, the second volume, which is published by Veer Singh Ji. And that is the life story of Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji. So in there, Baba Attar Singh Ji, Mahapurush, they did this bhajan to Sant Singh. And he told this later on to Major Prem Singh, who wrote the book. And then Sant Veer Singh Ji published it. Baba Attar Singh Ji said, जिस वक्त अमृत वेले नाम सिमरन विच साडी सुरत अंतर आत्मे जुड़दी है. Amrit Vela, just randomly, Sant Singh says that Baba Attar Singh Ji started in this bhajan, that when Amrit Vela, when I join in Naam Simran, my surati antaratme jud jandi hai. That it joins with Vaheguru. And it goes into that dargah, that Sachkhand of Vaheguru, that o samay atmik mandala vich, in those mandals we could say, those spiritual spheres, those sort of avasthas that only these Mahapurush know, these Gursikhs who get to the avastha they know about. Baba Attar Singh Ji said, at that time, when I join in Simran and I immerse in Simran, at that time, in them Atmik Mandala, in the spiritual spheres, I see two people, two Mahapurush. Kede si, sab to pehla Sant Baba Sham Singh Ji, and second Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. Baba Attar Singh Ji saying that. Such a great Mohan Mahapurush of the Panth. And they're saying, when I join in Simran, I see these two Mahapurush. I have darshan of them. So, aise Sant Baba Attar Singh Ji. And hopefully, we can do more on their Jivan, look more into their Jivan. Because one of that Jivan is just so vast. Just the book that Sant Baba Teja Singh Ji's written. When I was preparing for this podcast, I thought I'll go through the whole book. And I only got up to that point where they leave Hazur Sahib. And I thought, this is so much to cover. Je Maharaj Kirpa Karan, then slowly we can go through more about their Jivan.
Anji. And just quickly, Ji, you mentioned Baba Sham Singh Ji quite a lot in this podcast as well. Are we looking to do a podcast on them, right, in the next few months?
Baba Sham Singh Ji's Barsi is coming up in April.
Anji.
So hopefully before that, we'll try and do something on their life.
Anji. And then also Sant Singh Ji and Piare Singh Ji. We look to those as well, right?
Again, कोशिश एक करनी है कि as the Barsis or any day that's associated to that Mahapurush comes, maybe their birth date or the day that they went to Sachkhand, around that time we'll try and do something associated to that Mahapurush.
ठीक है जी. And is there anything else I have to finish off with? Thank you so much, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this podcast. Again, there's a lot of links in the description as well, even to some of the books that are available on Sant Attar Singh Ji's Jivani in English and in Punjabi, and also links to the previous podcasts. If you got any questions, then please leave them in the comment section, and we'll see you guys soon. Okay, ji. Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh.